There's a certain thrill that comes from the idea of having a carefree night in a wildly adventurous setting, free from the judgments of the everyday world, and I had always fantasized about what it would be like to be caught in a whirlwind romance with a stranger in an exotic locale. That thought lingered in the back of my mind for years, stoked by the countless movies I consumed and the endless stories floating through my social circles. But when I finally found the courage to act on one of my fantasies, I discovered the harsh realities lurking just beneath the surface. It all started when I moved to a new city after college, where everything felt fresh and full of promise. I had just landed a new job that required frequent travel, mostly to glamorous destinations, and one night in Barcelona, after a long day of meetings, I decided to embrace the moment. The warm night air was alive with music and laughter, and I was drawn into a crowded bar pulsating with energy. There, I met him, a charismatic artist with a mischievous glint in his eye and an accent that made my knees weak. He was everything my fantasies had promised: charming, spontaneous, and utterly intoxicating. We danced under the low lights, sharing stories that wove our lives together while the world faded around us. I felt alive for the first time in ages, intoxicated not just by the sangria but by the possibility that I was shedding my mundane reality for something vibrant and exhilarating. As the night deepened, he leaned in closer, whispering promises of adventure and intimacy. I could feel the tension sparking between us, a magnetic pull that made my heart race. Finally, in a haze of desire, we left the bar together, stumbling through dimly lit streets towards the nearest hotel, our laughter echoing off the cobblestones. But as the dawn broke over the city, the fantasy began to unravel. The morning light highlighted the disarray of my choice, and the artist wasn't the smooth romantic I'd pictured. His carefree facade slipped as he started talking about his commitments, his art, and his struggles with mental health. I felt the heavy weight of reality settle over us like a thick fog. Instead of a wild escape, I found myself in a deep discussion that made me acutely aware of the fragility of our encounter. I wanted to run, but there was compassion bubbling within me, urging me to listen and be present, and I struggled with the genuine connection contrasting starkly with the idealized moment I'd envisioned. I felt a rush of panic as I realized that this whirlwind had become a wave threatening to drown me. I was falling for the man behind the fantasy, not just the figure in my dreams, and as we talked, I was faced with the choice of whether to embrace this new reality or cling to the illusion of a carefree evening. Ultimately, I chose connection over escapism. We shared our fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities, and while we parted ways at noon, exchanging hesitant smiles and promises to keep in touch, I was left contemplating the nature of my fantasy and the truth we often overlook. Reflecting on that night, I realized that sometimes fantasies are not merely about pleasure or thrill, they can reveal deeper truths about ourselves, our yearnings for connection, understanding, and shared experience. I returned home feeling both liberated and unsettled, admiring how life rarely unfolds according to our plans. I don't think I'll ever forget him or the raw authenticity of our meeting. A few months later, I received a message from him, a simple "How are you?" followed by a photo of a new painting he'd created, something he claimed was inspired by our conversation. I smiled, knowing that the reality was so much richer than the fantasy, and wondered how many others were out there, living in the shadows of their own dreams. As I reflected on that night, I felt a sense of warmth, realizing that it wasn't a nightmare but a beautiful awakening, one that taught me to cherish the imperfections that make life so compelling. The days turned into weeks, and our exchanges evolved into something more profound. Each message from him felt like a gentle ripple in the still waters of my life, nudging me awake from the humdrum routine I had settled into. We shared fragments of our worlds, documenting every laugh, every desire, and every brush of vulnerability that came alive in our conversations. I began to look forward to our nightly chats, my heart dancing at the thought of unveiling the layers of his mind, and I started weaving him into my dreams. The reality was intoxicating, contrasting sharply with the fantasies I had once indulged in, where everything was steamy and perfect, a performance crafted to delight. This was different, it was raw and authentic, filled with the potential for connection and depth rather than mere physical encounters. There was a kind of magic in the imperfections that crept into our exchanges, like when I stumbled over my words, or he shared a painting that seemed incomplete, an echo of whispers and lines that spoke loudly, but lacked the finish and polish I had envisioned. One evening, during one of our lengthy dialogues, I felt the urge to broach the subject of reality. I wanted to tread carefully, though, knowing how easily dreams can shatter under the weight of expectations. "What do you think about exploring our fantasies further?" I typed, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send, the question hanging in the digital air between us like a conversation held at a cafe, the scent of coffee, and pastries wafting around us. I braced myself. Would he take it as a playful suggestion, or would he see it for what it was, a gentle nudge toward the frayed edges of reality? His reply came quicker than I anticipated, a simple "I've thought about it too. But part of me fears losing what we have." Those words echoed in my mind for days. We were treading on a precipice, hovering between the perfect fantasy we had built and the genuine connection that was blossoming. Part of me wanted to dive headfirst into the chaos of it all, to explore every nuance of our desires, to drunk press those fantasies into reality. But another part of me clung desperately to the warmth and safety of our words. What if the tangibility of our dreams bled the colors out of what was already vivid? The notion of it being a nightmare replayed in my thoughts. It was so easy to dance around the idea of passion when it was wrapped tightly in the cocoon of screens and distance. But what if, when stripped bare, the reality fell flat, an unfinished painting revealed under the hard light of day? Eventually, after scribbling tentative messages in my mind, I took a deep breath and pressed forward. What do you want to see happen? The question was a leap into the unknown, and I felt lighter yet heavier with the weight of it. I wondered if I caught a hint of hesitation in his response, a flicker of uncertainty that made my heart race and pulse thud against my chest. "I want to get to know the real you, beyond the words," he wrote, and I felt an overwhelming warmth spread within me, a craving that stretched beyond mere physicality. Weeks passed. Our dialogues traversed the spectrum of feelings, ranging from innocent musings on artistic inspiration to deep dives into the intricacies of commitment. We lost ourselves in stories of past loves, future dreams, and those midnight confessions that spilled out like secrets beneath the stars. Yet, I sensed a contention hanging over us, a question we were avoiding. I could almost hear it, that whisper of destiny. What would it mean to turn this cartoonish dream of skinny dipping in a warm ocean into a picturesque illusion? And then, one rainy evening in late autumn, a soft invitation came nudging into my inbox. How about meeting in person? The proposition shimmered before me like the glow of an uncertain flame, and I found myself grinning, then quickly frowning. My heart raced, anticipation clawing at my insides. Could I step into the canvas we'd painted together, or was that the moment when everything would dissolve? I could almost see it, the fantasy stretching out like a beautiful, uncharted horizon before me, pulling me in, while simultaneously pushing me away with the heavy weight of reality. Days of contemplation curled around me like smoke, each twist and turn of thought compelling me onward until I had crafted a response that both terrified and thrilled me. Yes. It hung in my mind like a fragile spell, one word laden with promise and dread. We settled on a small art gallery nestled on the quiet outskirts of town, a space drenched in creative energy, where the paintings were lively, and the atmosphere felt ethereal, scattering the lingering doubts like scattered leaves in the wind. The day of our meeting arrived, and 1,000 butterflies danced in my stomach as I entered the gallery, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the smells of rain and warming spices. The initial thrill fluttering in my chest was marred with a thick layer of apprehension. Would we get lost in each other's eyes, or was I stepping into an awkward situation destined to slip back into the shadows? But then I saw him, standing just beneath a sprawling canvas, blue in swirls of deeper hues that echoed the depths of my mind. Our eyes met, and the world faded into a quiet hum. The moment was surreal, bursting with an intensity I had not anticipated. We spent those hours enveloped in conversation, laughter echoing in the small space. I shared thoughts on art, he chuckled at my nervous stumbles, and for every word we exchanged, I felt the invisible thread tying us draw tighter. We painted a new story together, one that was only beginning to emerge from the canvas of our dreams, no longer constrained by the pixels that had connected us. When our hands brushed, I felt warm currents of electricity. It was clear that we were both aware of the tightrope we walked above an abyss of uncertainty, but the magic of the moment kept us tethered. As the evening wound down and twilight seeped into the gallery, we stepped outside, the world outside appearing softer, illuminated under the gentle glow of street lamps. A wave of real, tangible affection washed over me, fueling the moment with a quiet, electrifying promise. There was no fantasy tearing at the seams, no crumbling reality demanding attention. Just two people taking a chance, creating a story marked not by the typical markers of romance or lust, but by the foundations of honesty and friendship. Months later, I lay in bed, replaying the memories of his laughter and our first meaningful kiss, still enveloped in the sweetness of that night. What could have easily devolved into a nightmare instead turned into the core of a thriving journey, one that transformed our shared dreams into a fragile reality, delicate yet beautiful. With every shared moment and vulnerability, we crafted a version of ourselves that was, and always would be, infinitely richer than anything I had found before, reminding me that sometimes it's the unpredictable chaos of life that blooms into the kind of connection we often yearn for in our fantasies. And as I drifted off to sleep, I allowed the bittersweet wonder of it all to embrace me. In the quiet chambers of my mind, shadows of the past faded, replaced with the whispers of dreams yet to be realized, knowing fully that those fantasies, when touched by honesty, could morph into something stunningly, satisfyingly real. That night marked a turning point in my life, each thought spiraling gracefully into the next as I imagined the small changes I could embrace. I often found myself daydreaming about our conversation, the flow of ideas, the laughter interwoven with vulnerability. It became a tapestry of emotions that I would revisit on quiet evenings when the world outside dimmed into a soft glow. I replayed his words, the way he spoke about art and humanity. Folding my own little insecurities into the fabric of our connection, feeling a sense of permission to embrace my chaotic self. Days turned into weeks, and it astonished me how something so serendipitous could linger like the taste of a fine wine, warm and intoxicating. Every text he sent painted another layer in my mind, a canvas I didn't know I had, each exchange revealing the raw essence of two souls entangled in shared dreams. I began to see my life differently. Instead of the linear paths I had always walked, I found myself wandering into serendipitous alleys of adventure and self-discovery. Then, one evening, as rain drizzled softly against my window panes, my phone buzzed with a familiar rhythm. It was him again, this time asking if I'd like to see his latest exhibit, a showcase he had planned for months in a quaint gallery downtown. My heart raced at the thought. Compared to the previous vague illusions of intimacy through our screens, this was a real-world challenge, a shift from fantasy to reality, a chance to interact beyond the confines of our carefully curated words. I hesitated, nervous about stepping out of my comfort zone. What if we encountered the rawness of existence that often lay beyond the realm of our beautiful exchanges? What if it didn't measure up, shattering the soft cocoon we had spun around each other? But the allure of authenticity won the battle within, and I found myself standing before the gallery a few days later, curiosity blooming inside me as I entered the softly lit space. Colors danced on the walls, each painting embodying a story I hadn't lived, but could feel resonating deep within my heart. And there he was, standing proud amidst his canvases, a mix of nervousness and passion radiating from him like a beacon. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, the world around us faded. It was just the two of us, our connection flourishing amidst the strokes of paint and splashes of color. As we navigated through his works, he explained the inspiration behind each piece, his passion electric. I shared my thoughts too, hesitant but emboldened by the beauty around us and the contrast of our conversations that had now grown into something palpable. Yet, amidst the joy of discovery, I noticed a peculiar unease creeping in, a recognition of the thin line we were treading between fantasy and our very real lives. Suddenly, the idealistic images I had conjured up began to waver, revealing the intricacies of human connection that were not always as simple as they appeared in my dreams. It happened during a soft, spontaneous laugh shared over one of his more abstract pieces, which to me seemed chaotic and whimsical, yet to him symbolized the emotional wreckage of lost love and anger. In that moment, the laughter curdled slightly, revealing glimpses of his real-world complexity. As he bore his soul, shadows flickered in his eyes, hints of struggles and disappointments that his art had masked until now. The fantasy I had wrapped around him of the flawless artist who could lead me into a world painted with sunshine, began to reveal a semblance of darkness that mirrored my own. Feeling a rush of vulnerability, I opened up too, speaking of my own tribulations, the tightrope of expectations holding me hostage in my own life. As the evening unfolded, the layers of our conversations peeled back, leaving room for honesty but also a sense of hesitance, an unsteady dance of vulnerability that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Our connection deepened that night but was underscored by the ever-present reminder of our fears and insecurities, that perhaps the very beauty we sought was intertwined with the truths we often shied away from. And finally, as we exited the gallery, the gentle rain had morphed into a light drizzle, cascading down like whispered confessions. Walking side by side without a clear destination, I realized it was okay to embrace the unknown, finding solace in the warmth of his presence. The night felt alive, charged with the potential for shared dreams but also the weight of reality pressing down on us. As we reached a quiet park, the moonlight spilled across the grass, illuminating a space where we could stand still for a moment, allowing the hum of the city to fade into the background. I turned to look at him, and in the silent exchange, I understood. The beauty of our connection was not in the idealized fantasies we had conjured, but in the intricacies, the messiness of our truths intertwined. This wasn't a neatly wrapped story, it was still unfolding, an exquisite blend of highs and lows living in the breath between our words. As I lay in bed that night, the echoes of our conversation lingered, a tapestry woven from threads of joy, fear, longing, and relief. No longer was I drifting off to sleep solely wrapped in thoughts of unrealized fantasies. Instead, I was cradled by the promise of an authentic journey ahead, one where nightmares didn't hold dominion over my dreams. In that acceptance, amidst the cacophony of life's beautiful chaos, I felt free. The stars outside shone brightly, as if nodding along to my revelations, and I surrendered to sleep, secure in the knowledge that every moment was a brushstroke on the canvas of my life, exactly as it was meant to be. It's funny how life can seem so normal one minute and then unravel completely the next. I remember sitting in my living room, maybe a week into the lockdown, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders like I was being buried alive. My name is Sam, and I had always been the type of person who thrived on routine, working from home when I was given the chance, taking my daily strolls to the coffee shop just 2 blocks away, and settling into my cozy chair every evening to read or binge watch whatever captivating show I could find. The silence that enveloped my neighborhood during those first few days of the COVID lockdown felt almost foreign. It was like the world had pressed pause on the very fabric of our lives, and what should have been a simple moment of quiet turned into an unsettling void that echoed in my chest. My phone buzzed incessantly with news updates, family group chats, and the occasional Zoom invitation, further drawing me into a vortex of uncertainty, but I didn't want to join those calls. I didn't want to see smiling faces that felt haunted by the anxiety we all shared. What was meant to be a temporary setback had soon launched me into what felt like a living nightmare, my isolation only deepening as the days rolled into weeks. But as the months passed, I slowly began to adapt to this strange new reality. I started sharing my thoughts on Reddit, joining various communities to find solace among strangers, pouring out my feelings about the lockdowns, and sharing my experiences of loneliness and frustration. That's where I met Lucy, someone who felt equally lost and bewildered by it all. She lived several states away, her life similarly altered. Our conversations drifted from light banter to deeper reflections about loss and hope. Sharing snippets of our daily lives became our safe haven. She talked about her love for painting and the vibrant colors that often eluded her during the lockdowns, while I found comfort in her words and began putting my thoughts onto paper. What had started as a way to escape turned into a blossoming friendship. We began video chatting nightly, our laughter filling what had once been an empty void. The refracted sunlight streaming through my window as I sat on the floor with my laptop felt warm. It illuminated not only my space but also the corners of my heart that had dimmed. I had not anticipated feeling this connection during a time rife with uncertainty. Yet, as time marched on, I found myself wrestling with something I hadn't expected, the weight of a burgeoning affection for Lucy. It was undeniable, and with every shared late-night confession, my heart ached with the gravity of feelings unspoken. Would revealing my feelings jeopardize the solace we'd built together? The internal conflict tugged at my mind incessantly. I didn't want to ruin the one thing that had brought color back into my life, and still, I longed to tell her just how much she meant to me. One evening, as we talked about the future and the world reopening, I felt the courage swell within me like the tide swelling under the moonlight. In a raw moment of honesty, I confessed my feelings and admitted the delicate dance of hope that had taken hold of my heart. To my relief, she was quiet for a moment, and then smiled, her eyes sparkling with the very same vulnerability. It turned out she had felt the spark too, unsure how to voice it amid the chaos surrounding us. As the lockdowns began to lift and the world cautiously re-emerged from the shadows, so did our friendship blossom into something more profound. We planned to meet, finally collapsing the distance that had once kept us apart. That day arrived, the sun shining brightly in stark contrast to the rain clouds of the past year, and I remember pacing nervously in a small park where we agreed to meet. When I saw her walking toward me, there was an electrifying jolt in the air as if time had paused for just a moment. The laughter and love we had built from screens now resonated through the rustling of leaves and the soft chirping of birds around us. The discussions that spanned evenings and wrapped around our hearts became rich conversations in person, and in those quiet moments, I realized how much I had yearned for human connection. We embraced, and it felt as if I was breathing life for the first time after gasping for air. Reflecting now, it's surreal to think about how COVID was a catalyst, a strange and terrifying tragedy that somehow led me to Lucy, who now stands by my side as we navigate this post-lockdown era together. Life shifted dramatically during those months, and when I envision that time, I think of more than just isolation. I think of finding love, rediscovering passion and creativity, and rekindling the simple joys like the warmth of laughter. And to answer that imagined question in 25 years about life during the lockdown, I'll say it was during those dark days that I found the light in unexpected places, and, more importantly, within myself, igniting a flame that continues to burn, reminding me that even the darkest of nights can lead to a brilliant dawn. Update: a few months later, Lucy and I are doing well together, our bond stronger than ever. We've even started collaborating on some artistic projects, blending her painting with my writing, and it feels incredible to work side by side, creating new worlds together. As the world around us seems to find its rhythm again, I remain ever grateful for the quiet moments that led me to this exhilarating chapter of life, and I often remind myself that sometimes, amidst chaos, you can stumble into something beautiful and unexpected. As I sit here in the soft morning light filtering through our cluttered studio, I can't help but reflect on how far we've come since those uncertain days of lockdown. The space is filled with the heady scent of paint and freshly brewed coffee, a mixture that feels like home now, and it's easy to forget that just a few months ago, even stepping outside felt like a gamble. Lucy is perched on her stool, her paintbrush dancing across the canvas, lost in her world of colors and textures while I type furiously on my laptop, trying to capture the essence of our journey in words. There's an unspoken understanding between us, a rhythm that seems to sync our creative energies into a harmonious flow, and I often pause to watch her. The way her brow furrows in concentration and the soft smile that breaks through when she's particularly pleased with a stroke reminds me of everything we've learned in the chaos of those months apart. Our bond was forged in that strange silence of the lockdown, when we were forced to face ourselves and the depth of our emotions. Even when the world outside grew louder with conflicting narratives and demands for normalcy, Lucy and I carved out our own little sanctuary, one filled with art, laughter, and honest conversations. I can still recall the tension of those early days, the screen time stretching endlessly, the dread of the unknown gnawing at my stomach, and the conversations that oscillated between overly optimistic and painfully honest. I remember one evening in particular, where the weight of isolation hung heavy in the air. Lucy had called me, worry draping her voice like a thick fog. She spoke of loneliness, of dreams deferred, and fears bubbling just below the surface. I listened, feeling helpless from afar, but it was in this raw exchange that we unearthed our shared insecurities, and both of us started to voice the longing for connection. Slowly, we began a ritual of sorts. Every evening at 6, we would meet virtually, sharing snippets of our days, our worries, and our hopes, gradually stitching the gaping holes that distance created in our hearts. The soft glow from our screens became a lifeline. Over time, conversations turned into creative exchanges, and before I knew it, we were nurturing something that went beyond friendship. The moment we decided to collaborate, it felt like a blossoming flower, effortlessly unfolding, revealing colors and patterns we never knew existed. Once we began blending our arts, her vibrant, swirling colors complementing my stories that danced with emotion, we uncovered a new facet of our relationship. Each painting sparked a narrative, each poem inspired a vivid scene, and it felt as if we were building a bridge from our separate lives to one shared together, alive with inspiration. Today, as I watch her mix cobalt blue with hints of emerald, I can't shake off the gratitude that washes over me. I realize that those long, isolating nights ultimately gifted us with clarity, to see each other not only as creators but as partners navigating this unpredictable world. I wouldn't change a thing. As our brushes glide across the canvases, Lucy meets my gaze, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Did you think the lockdown would lead to us being an art duo?" she asks, and I chuckle, shaking my head. I never saw the turning points as clearly back then, lost as I was in the noise of uncertainty. Now, with each stroke shared between us, I'm awash in the beauty of this unexpected journey. I muse over where we will go from here, as life continues to ebb and flow beyond the four walls of our studio. There are projects we hope to pursue together, displays at local galleries, eventually a joint exhibition where our creations can converse with each other in a shared space. Perhaps even a published collection, where her art meets my words, a testament of our intertwined paths forged through adversity. And on days when the world feels overwhelming, I find comfort in reminding myself that our bond emerged from that stillness, that even from chaos, we can arrive at harmony. As I finish my thoughts, the soft chime of Lucy's laughter drifts through the air, followed by the gentle swishing of her paintbrush. Just then, I feel a stir of anticipation, a realization that whatever life has in store for us next, we will embrace it together, as a team, holding on to the knowledge that even the most daunting circumstances can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, our little sanctuary of creativity flourished, much like the vibrant blossoms sprouting in the garden outside our window. The sunlight poured into our shared space, illuminating the canvas that had begun to sprout Lucy's imaginative strokes, while my words transformed into stories that danced around her art, creating a tapestry of color and emotion. I still remember the day we decided to tackle something new together. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the world seemed to hold its breath, and everything beyond our walls faded away. An impulsive idea took root amidst our laughter. Let's create a children's book filled with whimsical tales and striking illustrations, tales that could whisk young readers away to fantastical realms where anything was possible. But as the proposal took shape, so did a wave of uncertainty wash over me. What if the story I wove wasn't good enough for her art? What if my words overshadowed her beautiful brushwork, or worse, became flat under the weight of her brilliance? I watched her with wonder, her subject matter shifting fluidly between animals, landscapes, and whimsical creatures, each piece brimming with joy, and I couldn't help but question whether I was worthy of sharing this labor of love with someone so gifted. All of this churned inside me, a silent struggle against the rising tide of my own insecurities, until one evening, unable to contain it anymore, I laid my concerns bare, the vulnerability raking over me like a chill wind. "Lucy," I whispered, catching her mid-stroke, "what if my writing isn't enough to match your art? What if I ruin it?" She paused, met my gaze with her vivid eyes that held challenges and reassurances in equal measure, and said, "But it won't be about adequate or inadequate, it'll be about us, about our story. We're crafting something uniquely ours." In those words, like a gentle tide washing away the remnants of my doubt, I felt a surge of excitement swell within me. Our project wasn't merely a collaboration, it was a blend of our souls, forged from the fragility of uncertainty yet buoyed by the strength of companionship. So we dove in headfirst, spending countless hours immersed in inspiration, often losing track of time as we shared ideas and sketches, our laughter echoing through the cozy corners of our home. The world outside resumed its relentless pace, but within our bubble, we existed in a realm of creativity that felt blissfully untouched by chaos. As the book began to take shape, I found a rhythm, a harmonious connection emerging not only through our art and stories but in the deeper understanding of one another that we nurtured. During this time, I realized just how much I had feared vulnerability. I had barricaded myself behind walls built from self-doubt, never realizing how stifling and solitary those walls made me feel. In those late hours, bathed in the warm glow of string lights we had hung above our workspace, Lucy and I unraveled and stitched back together, revealing fragments of our pasts and dreams that previously lay dormant. One night, while we took a break, sprawled out on our living room floor, I felt an overwhelming urge to put pen to paper and write a letter addressed to the future readers of our book, a message filled with hope and encouragement for children who might feel lost or lonely, just as I had felt for a long time. It became a love letter not just to them, but to our journey, defining the importance of authenticity and the magic born from shared creativity amidst uncertainty. That moment felt like a revelation, as if all the noise of the outside world melted away, leaving only the soft whisper of possibility in its wake. As we neared completion of our project, excitement blended seamlessly with nostalgia. I knew this endeavor would leave an imprint on my life, just as the lockdown had done, allowing me the space to reflect, grow, and ultimately, find my creative voice. And then came the day when we finally held the finished book in our hands, our combined efforts manifested between the covers. It was surreal, the colors seemed to leap off the pages, and the words danced in tandem with the illustrations, a perfect testament to how far we had come since that initial bonding over comfortable silence. My heart soared as I looked into Lucy's eyes, her pride reflected in a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. It was in that moment I understood that I was not just embracing what lay ahead but also honoring the beautiful past that had brought us together. As I ponder my experiences during those isolation days, I find solace reflecting that remarkable connection, one that blossomed from quiet homes and simple conversations, reminding me that amidst unknowns lie the seeds of unforgettable stories, woven together in love, creativity, and collaboration. And now, every time someone asks about the lockdown years, I can smile, not just because of the chaos that once filled the air, but because of the unexplored beauty it unearthed, something that continues to inspire us, urging me to create and dream, hand in hand with the person who taught me how to see magic in the mundane. There are moments in life that shimmer with an irrepressible magic, etching themselves into the fabric of our memory, and sometimes they arrive when we least expect them. It all started on a rainy Wednesday, the kind where the sky drips gray and the world feels muted, a perfect excuse to stay in, wrapped in blankets with a book and a cup of tea. I had just broken up with Jake, a charming guy with a smile that could light up a room, but an emotional distance that left me feeling cold. I spent days mulling over our disintegration, wondering how it had gone from sweet promises whispered over candlelit dinners to awkward silences filled with things unsaid. It was in this fog of introspection that my phone buzzed. A notification from a book club app that I barely kept up with. Intrigued, I opened it to find a message from someone I had never conversed with before, a fellow member named Marcus. He had posted something simple, asking for recommendations on books about personal growth. My curiosity piqued. I tapped out a response, hinting at the layers of complexity I found in books like The Alchemist and Atomic Habits. I didn't expect the conversation to continue, but Marcus replied almost immediately, elaborating on his personal struggles and how literature had been a refuge for him during tough times. What unfolded over the next hour was an exchange unlike any I'd experienced before. He spoke openly about vulnerability and the importance of self-reflection, qualities often overlooked in our fast-paced lives. Each message felt like unwrapping a gift, revealing parts of himself wrapped in honesty and warmth. As the clock silently marked the passing hours, I felt an electric connection begin to spark through the weighted silence that had settled over my heart since Jake. I learned that Marcus was a teacher at a local school, dedicated to helping students find their passion, a fact that resonated with me deeply. It was refreshing to see someone who wanted to make a difference, not just in the classroom but as a person. He shared anecdotes of his students, the struggles they faced, and how life had shaped him into someone who believes in the power of kindness, not because he had to, but because he genuinely wanted to. That emotional depth was intoxicating. When I reluctantly closed my phone that night, a sense of contentment washed over me, replacing the anxiety I had been harboring. Little did I know, this new friendship would take me through a powerful transformation. Over the next few weeks, we would exchange thoughts on everything from life philosophies to the best local coffee spots, finding a rhythm that felt just right. But one sunny Saturday morning, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee in person. My heart raced. This was the moment to step away from the comfort of screens and into uncharted territory. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, feeling both a rush of anticipation and a tremor of doubt. What if it was a disaster? What if the chemistry did not translate beyond the brightly lit screens? Steeling myself, I agreed, buoyed by the hope that had rooted itself so deeply in my chest. The day of our meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the uncertainty brewing inside me. As I sat across from Marcus in a cozy cafe, the sunlight filtering through the large windows casting warm light across the rustic wooden tables, I felt an unexpected wave of calm. We chatted as if we were old friends, the conversation flowing effortlessly, punctuated by infectious laughter that drew curious glances from other patrons. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the person behind the messages, the vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke of personal losses, the passion that ignited his tone when discussing his hopes for his students. It was crystal clear that this was a man who cared deeply about the world and all its intricacies. However, the moment that stood out the most was when, in the middle of a conversation about a favorite book, Marcus caught sight of a homeless man outside the cafe, holding a cardboard sign. Rather than ignore him, Marcus excused himself and walked outside, speaking to the man in hushed tones. I watched, a mix of admiration and bewilderment washing over me, as he handed him the contents of his own lunch, an exquisite Black Forest sandwich he had just ordered with extra care. He returned, a soft smile on his face, but my heart felt heavy with the realization of the depth of his character. This was someone who saw people, really saw them. The world blurred momentarily, I could barely process the warmth that flooded my chest, a mix of respect and affection that had come out of nowhere. As we continued to talk, I found myself hoping for a future intertwined with this respectful, kind-hearted man, and my mind drifted back to Jake and the many things that led to our unraveling. I learned that sometimes, it's those little moments, like sharing a meal or acknowledging someone who might usually go unnoticed, that truly illustrate a person's worth. Days turned into weeks, and we began dating, exploring local parks, attending literature events, and discovering art galleries together. Every encounter deepened my belief that I had stumbled upon something rare with Marcus, his kindness casting shadows on my previous relationships. It took time, but with openness, he encouraged me to embrace my emotions, no longer feeling the need to cloak them in pretense. I often found myself reflecting on that rainy night when we first connected, wondering if my decision to engage in a simple conversation had altered the course of my life. It made me realize that sometimes, it simply takes one person to truly understand you to change everything. And just when I thought life couldn't surprise me any longer, Marcus announced he had signed up for a local volunteering program that aimed to help feed those in need. Without hesitation, I joined him. Together, we cooked, prepared meals, and served food. With the hope that we would one day be part of the change that transcended beyond our cafe conversations. Life keeps rolling forward, the days falling like leaves from a tree, each one different yet evolving beautifully in its own right. So here I sit, grateful for vulnerability, for connection, and for a man who took a moment to care, not just for the words I shared, but for the humanity around him. Perhaps I would still be wrapped in blankets, searching for something I had lost, if not for a simple notification on a dreary day. After all, isn't that how life unfolds? You just have to be present for the magic. I find myself in a cozy corner of my living room, the soft glow of the fairy lights wrapping around the walls like a comforting embrace. I had long resigned myself to the idea of solitude, filling my evenings with stories woven from the threads of fiction and the dim light of my imagination. My mornings danced to the monotonous tune of coffee brewing and emails pinging. It was a rhythm I knew well, but one that seemed to grind on my spirit with each passing week. Until that day at the cafe, sitting across from Mark, I had thought that perhaps my story was one of quiet solitude, a life observed from the sidelines. But he disrupted that narrative effortlessly with his warmth and authenticity, like a sudden ray of sun breaking through a cloudy sky. He listened, really listened, as I shared tales of my fears and aspirations, his dark eyes reflecting a genuine curiosity that was contagious. I remember a particularly rainy afternoon, the sound of droplets tap dancing against the cafe window while I unwrapped layers of my heart. I spoke of feeling lost in my work, of wanting to venture beyond the confines of my comfort zone yet being tethered to the security of familiarity. As I finished, I caught a faint smile dancing on his lips. "You know," he said softly, "the only real boundaries we face are the ones we impose on ourselves. What if you took that leap? What if you stepped into the unknown?" His words hung in the air, and I pondered them long after the cafe closed that day, echoing through my thoughts like a persistent melody. In the weeks that followed, our meetups became a salvation from the loneliness that loomed beyond my walls. His insights were not just words, they were keys that began to unlock doors inside me. With each conversation, the branches of my worldview expanded, reaching toward experiences I had once thought were impossible. I started exploring painting, something I had tried once in high school but dismissed as a failure, the shame of that long-ago critique by a judge too stingy to appreciate the art of the moment. Inspired by Mark's encouragement, I splashed colors on canvas, my brushes dancing with joy and uncertainty, the very essence of vulnerability spilling forth in vivid hues. The act of creating became a sanctuary, a place where I found myself unmasking layers built over the years. One evening, as we chatted and sipped tea in my favorite cafe, Mark shared a turning point in his own life, a story so eerily parallel to mine yet uniquely different, rooted in struggles and triumphs that made me appreciate him even more. He had faced his own demons, and instead of running away, he dove deeper, confronting them as one confronts a storm. That night, I suddenly felt a connection stretching beyond friendship, ignited by openness and honesty, as we shared pieces of ourselves we had held tightly to for far too long. Yet, the fear of complicating this connection whispered doubts in my mind. Was it foolish to long for something more, to risk what we had built? But as Mark and I delved deeper into discussions, about dreams that loomed just out of reach, fears that felt insurmountable, and possibilities that seemed to shimmer like stars on a clear night, I realized that with him, there was a comfort in vulnerability, a safety net woven from mutual respect and shared experiences. The shift was subtle yet profound, and one day, as we savored the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, I found my heartbeat racing. "Mark," I started, my voice steady through the tremor of anticipation, "do you think it's possible for friends to become something more?" The atmosphere thickened with tension, yet beneath it lay an unspoken promise. His gaze didn't falter, instead, it softened, and in that beautiful, breathless moment, everything shifted once again. "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied, a grin breaking the seriousness of his expression. In the haze of that afternoon, I felt as if our lives were threads being stitched into a larger tapestry, each stitch vibrant and alive. And just like that, the prospects of love, connection, and belonging became a canvas we painted together. As I reflect on this journey, I realize it was about more than just a simple attraction or shared cups of coffee. It became about rediscovering myself, about exploring the concept of vulnerability in relationships. Mark taught me that sometimes, when we allow ourselves to be seen, we invite not only connection but also the chance to grow, to evolve into versions of ourselves we haven't yet met. Perhaps, in the end, it was never just about him being different, but about how, through him, I could discover the facets of my own heart that had long been shrouded in shadows. That dreary day I received that notification felt like a distant memory now, buried under layers of laughter and shared dreams. I hold on to hope, not just for what's to come, but for the beauty found in simply being present for all that life has to offer. And as I lay in the quiet of my softly lit room, I can't help but smile, knowing that the simplest of moments can unfurl the most profound transformations, leaving us to wonder just how many other connections lie waiting, just outside the door of our comfort zones, ready to blossom if only we open ourselves up to the magic. As I basked in that tranquil moment, my reflection danced in the dusk-lit window, a reminder of a time I often replayed in my mind. I thought back to the first day I met Milo, the boy who burst into my life like a sudden summer rain, refreshing and unexpected. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where even the warmth of the coffee shop ticked just a bit too low on the thermostat, the scent of cinnamon laced throughout but feeling lost in the gloom. I sat hunched over my laptop, shrouded in layers of my emotional fortitude, consumed by words that refused to flow. Above the dull hum of the espresso machine, the world outside dimmed with the encroaching evening, and my thoughts tossed themselves around in chaotic knots. Just then, I heard the door swing open, and an unfamiliar face stepped in, glancing around until his gaze landed on a solitary empty table near mine. Even from a distance, I knew he was different. There was a spark of genuine curiosity in his eyes, a warm glimmer that rippled through the cafe as he settled into his chair. His hair was tousled, and his clothes looked slightly rumpled, but it was the quiet confidence in his demeanor that captured my attention. Milo pulled out a sketchbook, its pages filled with intricate doodles, and as he began to draw, the world around him seemed to fade into the background. I couldn't help but steal glances at his art, each stroke of his pencil revealing stories I yearned to know, stories that whispered to me as they met the paper. In a twist of courage buoyed by curiosity, I leaned over a little, letting my eyes devour the depth of his creativity. He noticed me, his brow raising in a friendly challenge, and unexpectedly, he grinned, that lovely, boyish grin illuminating his face. "You look like you could use a little inspiration," he said, inviting me into his enchanting world with a playful confidence. What drew me in was not just his talent but the way he didn't shy away from the connection. He took the chance to spark conversation, and before long, our shared laughter unraveled the tension that had gripped my heart. Hours slipped by unnoticed. We swapped stories, my struggles, his quiet dreams of an artist's life somewhere vibrantly outside these cafe walls, and I found myself unwinding like a tightly wound spring, revealing pieces of my heart I had nearly forgotten. It felt surreal, almost like I was stepping off a path I had walked for far too long, wandering into new territory where warmth and kindness danced around us like fireflies lighting the dusk. Our discussions flowed effortlessly, and with every sentence, a burgeoning friendship unfurled like petals kissed awake by the sun. As we parted that day, I didn't just walk back into the world outside, I crossed a threshold forged by connection, where vulnerabilities were shared and dreams no longer felt quite so distant. The weeks transformed into months, and our coffee shop became a beacon of ease amid the turbulence of life, an oasis of warmth where fears faded, replaced with dreams laid bare. With each encounter, I was met with expressions of empathy intertwined with gentle humor, and my initial hesitance melted. It was an awakening of the heart, discovering just how much healing resides in connection without pretense. The conversations meandered from our shared loves for art and music to the intricacies of life's struggles, loss, uncertainty, and the delicate dance of pursuing our passions. Each encounter felt like unwinding a thread, weaving together the fragmented pieces of our lives into a tapestry more vibrant than I ever anticipated. In this space, I uncovered what had been lurking within me, a long-buried desire for authenticity. I opened up about my fears, about how loneliness clung to me like a shadow, how I had long stopped believing I mattered. Yet, every time I shared, Milo listened more intently, his eyes reflecting empathy that brought warmth on even the coldest of days. In return, he would unfurl snippets of his own insecurities, tales of rejection as an artist, and the question of whether his passion would ever bear fruit. At this exchange, we somehow brewed a potion of mutual encouragement, our dreams blossoming within those small, safe moments where nothing felt insurmountable. And then, one fateful evening, under the soft, flickering candlelight of our usual table, Milo leaned across with a look that should have startled me, but instead felt like an inevitability. "You know," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper yet tinged with urgency, "you have this incredible light in you, and it feels as if you're ready to let it shine." My breath caught in my throat, his words pierced through me, exposing layers I had meticulously guarded. There it was, this gentle nudging that compelled me to confront my fears of inadequacy, notions of being forgotten, and the belief that perhaps it was time to step outside of the cocoon I had woven around myself. I felt emotions swirl, a blend of trepidation and elation, as he reached for my hand, an innocent gesture that connected us in a way far deeper than just two souls sharing dreams over coffee. It ignited something within me, this indescribable assurance that maybe I could contribute something beautiful to the world, that I had every right to occupy space. In that moment, as I sank deeper into his gaze, I realized I was in the midst of something so profoundly transformative, not solely because of him, but also because of my willingness to open up, to share the unfiltered truth of my heart. Even as I reminisce in my softly lit room now, with shadows dancing lightly across the walls, I know that everything shifted from that very first conversation. Milo not only encouraged me to explore my creativity but inspired a movement within me, lifting veils of doubt and replacing them with brushstrokes of hope and purpose. So here I lay, cherishing the beauty of life and love, knowing that vulnerability can lead to the most exquisite magic. Our journeys might intertwine in unexpected ways. But the truth remains, we are all just waiting for a little spark, for a connection that urges us to step fully into the light, reminding us that sometimes, the most beautiful transformations begin with a simple act of kindness. There I was, standing in the corner of a dimly lit room, watching as people laughed and mingled, the soft thrum of music setting a carefree backdrop to the evening. It was supposed to be a fun night out, a chance for me to impress Melissa, my date, who had caught my eye a few weeks ago at the coffee shop where I worked. We had hit it off swiftly, sharing jokes and secrets over cups of steaming lattes, and on that Friday night, I felt hopeful that this party would deepen our connection. But a mere hour into the gathering, my excitement began to dwindle as a strange pit of disappointment settled in my stomach. I had made my way to the bar to grab water, feeling slightly parched from the small talk I had been engaging in. I turned to Melissa and asked if she would mind grabbing 2 glasses while I full-on chatted with a few friends who had arrived. With a playful smile, she agreed. Minutes passed, and I noticed her standing at the bar, chatting with some of her friends and completely neglecting my request. I could feel a sense of annoyance creeping up me. It wasn't that big of a favor. I mean, how hard was it to just fill a glass with water? When I finally got her attention, I decided to approach the bar myself, making my way through the warm crowd. I didn't want to make a scene, but as I reached the counter, claims of thirst whispered in my mind. When I returned with my 2 glasses, I found her laughing with a group, her head thrown back in mirth, showing no signs of having noticed my absence. I felt a mix of irritation and frustration clashing within me. Shouldn't she have cared that I was waiting? After all, if the roles were reversed, wouldn't I have done the same for her? I set the glasses down, approached her too calm demeanor, and quipped lightly, "Did you not hear me ask for water?" Her response was more flippant than I had anticipated, akin to waving a dismissive hand at a child's tantrum. "Chill out. It's just water. We're having fun, aren't we?" I had considered myself easygoing, perhaps even too easy at times, but this felt different. I wasn't just parched, I felt like an afterthought. I thought about trying to shrug it off, to laugh with her, and pretend her nonchalance didn't bother me. Yet that wasn't the case. Something deep inside tugged at me, urging me to pay attention to the growing fissure in our evening. "You wouldn't want to take water to someone else, would you?" Her chuckle faded. Clearly, I had struck a nerve, but instead of a calm discussion, I was met with her raised eyebrows and a tone that meant an impending storm. I felt my stomach churn as a deeper realization set in for me. This wasn't just about water, it felt like our dynamic was revealing an underlying issue. These clues stripped the evening of all its sweetness. I stepped away from the group, indicating I needed a breather. I felt guilt wash over me. I liked her. Was I really about to let a glass of water become the reason I'd leave? After taking a moment in the rear garden, surrounded by the muted sounds of the party drifting through the open door, something shifted. I didn't want to keep fighting for her attention. It stung, but leaving felt like reclaiming a small piece of my dignity. As I walked out, I glanced back at Melissa, immersed in her laughter, oblivious, and I realized that sometimes, situations highlight the disparities in how people value one another. I felt a bittersweet relief washing over me. Deep down, I knew this wasn't a friendship destined to grow. Later that night, as I lay sprawled in my room under softly glowing fairy lights, I reflected on what happened. Maybe I wasn't the biggest villain, perhaps, it was time to revamp what I sought in relationships. Maybe my needs were simple but important, and if she couldn't meet them, or even acknowledge them, that was worth noting. That little moment revealed more about her indifference, and ultimately, I would rather spend my time with someone who wouldn't just quench my physical thirst, but my emotional one as well. Update: a few days passed, and Melissa texted me, casually asking when we could hang out again. I considered the message, my mind aligning all the reasons to say no. Instead, I replied honestly. I mentioned that I appreciated the good times but felt like we were on different wavelengths, and perhaps it was best to part ways. To my surprise, she responded quickly, expressing mild frustration but also acceptance. "I guess we just weren't meant to be," she replied, a little too nonchalantly. I sat there staring at my phone. Yes, it was bittersweet, but it also felt liberating, like I was finally setting my own boundaries, opening up space for someone who might just care enough to hand me a glass of water when I asked for it. I set my phone down, staring blankly at the room around me, filled with the soft hues of early evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The silence seemed thicker now, as if the air had gained weight after our exchange. I found myself reflecting not only on that last date but on that entire week, the parties I had attended, the conversations that felt more like choreographed performances than genuine connections. My heart had pangs of loneliness even amidst laughter and chatter. It was all so superficial. I cherished depth, but depth seemed harder to find. I thought about that moment at the party when all I had wanted was a simple glass of water. It felt monumental then, a test of sorts. Would he care enough to step away from his own fun for just a minute to make sure I was comfortable? But instead, I had been met with uncomfortable laughter and a flippant brush-off, the kind of casual dismissal that stung far more deeply than anyone could have anticipated. As I wandered into the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the cupboard door and winced. My eyes looked tired, a little sad. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for anyway, some validation? Understanding? Or perhaps just a partner who saw me as I truly was, rather than a checklist they could tick off at a party. Sipping the warm tea, I tried to focus my thoughts. I could feel the echoes of their laughter still surrounding me, but rather than drown in it, I wanted to find a way out into the quiet. I wanted to rediscover myself in the silence. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed busy, working through stacks of paperwork during the day, and on weekends, I buried myself in hobbies I had neglected. A long-forgotten passion for painting took precedence one afternoon as I dipped my brush into vibrant colors. Each stroke on the canvas seemed to soothe my restlessness, allowing buried emotions to flow out, a startling catharsis emerging from the swirl of blues and greens. Yet amid that serenity, I couldn't shake off the tangled cords of loneliness. Somewhere deep down, I still craved companionship, a connection that felt real. By the time I got the invite for a friend's upcoming birthday party, I hesitated, contemplating whether I should go. This time, however, the thought didn't fill me with dread. In fact, it carried a sense of anticipation. I dressed up that evening with a newfound liveliness. I chose an outfit that made me feel confident, a pair of bright, flowy pants and a top that shimmered just enough to catch the light. Maybe, with a little luck, I would meet someone who understood the value of communication, even for small things like water. It would be clear from the start that I wanted more, a dual respect that could blossom in little interactions. Once at the party, I first wandered toward the snack table, grabbing a few bites while scanning the crowd. I laughed as I recognized familiar faces and exchanged pleasantries. For the first time in a while, I felt weightless in my own skin, unburdened by expectations, both from myself and the people around me. Eventually, I found a quiet corner on the patio, where soft music fueled gentle conversations. I admired the way the stars began to twinkle above. It was mesmerizing, grounding, and perhaps inviting for possibilities. That's when she approached, Maya, an acquaintance from a mutual circle. She had a genuine smile that lit up her face, and her laughter resonated with warmth and candor. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her, as if we were old friends catching up. Mid-conversation, I asked her if I could grab a glass of water and, to my delight, she immediately grabbed mine and her cup matter-of-factly, sliding them both toward me without second-guessing. As she casually remarked how important hydration could be, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since that last encounter, I felt seen, as if I had been handed a lifeline rather than just a drink. Over the next hour, we shared stories about life, quirky hobbies, travel dreams, and the absurdity of dating mishaps. I felt my heart lightening as I realized the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, just two people connecting over shared experiences and laughter. It didn't matter if this led anywhere romantic, it was the dialogue and the companionship that felt renewing. Amidst all this, I could feel my earlier hesitations fading away, not because I feared being alone, but because here, in this little pocket of the universe, I knew I had worth, and I wouldn't settle for anything less. As the night wound down, we exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, both of us leaving perhaps with the potential for friendship or something deeper. Walking home under the starlit sky, I took a deep breath, a smile drawing across my lips. I didn't feel like I had lost it all, rather, I felt that I was finally starting to gain everything I wanted, not just in a partner, but also the self-assurance of knowing what I deserved. In the days that followed, I wondered if any of this would lead anywhere more than light-hearted chats over coffee. Still, the journey of rediscovering myself felt infinitely more significant than focusing on finding a romantic partner. As those weeks turned into months, each conversation with Maya, no matter how simple, helped build a foundation that eventually turned delightful, sometimes surprising. I realized it was always the little things that mattered, just like a glass of water did that night. I chuckled softly to myself, reflecting that maybe, finally, I had learned to navigate my own path, and perhaps I had even found someone who could walk alongside it, glass in hand, genuinely invested in more than just where life would lead us. And so, as I curled up on my couch one quiet evening, I felt a peace I hadn't encountered in a long time, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew, I wasn't the asshole for leaving a party. If anything, I had made room for something far better than I had ever hoped for. The following weeks unfolded like a gentle sunrise, warm and promising. I took my time getting used to this new chapter. I was buoyed by my decision, and it sparked something within me, a renewed sense of self-worth that felt as refreshing as my long-awaited glass of water. I began to explore hobbies I had set aside for far too long, painting during the quiet afternoons, journaling under the naked branches of winter trees, and even experimenting with new recipes after a cold spell had made takeout an almost too recurrent theme. With each brushstroke or new ingredient, I felt greater clarity wash over me, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I didn't know were lost in the routine of trying to please others. Yet, while wallowing in my solitude, I found myself thinking about the deeper connections I craved. Sometimes, I'd scroll through my phone, catching snippets of conversations from my friends, discussing their heartbreaks or busy careers, which only reminded me that even in shared experiences, people saw the world so differently. It wasn't just about parties or social gatherings anymore, it was about feeling valued in the smallest acts, of someone genuinely listening to my needs. One crisp Saturday afternoon, I received a text from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long while. Jess always had the right level of kindness blended with mischief that made her captivating to be around. She wanted to know if I'd join her and a few others at a local coffee shop for an art festival starting next weekend. Memories of our spontaneous adventures flickered in my mind, and without hesitating this time, I agreed. The closer the date approached, the more I found myself alternating between excitement and apprehension. What if I froze again? What if someone needed something from me, and I felt constricted by the desire to appease? Those thoughts clung to me like shadows, but I understood they stemmed from the residual anxiety of that last party. And yet, how could I forge new memories without risking a little vulnerability? The day arrived, and the old coffee shop was even more enchanting than I remembered, with chunky vintage furniture and soft jazz humming in the background. The walls were adorned with local artists' works, vibrant colors splashed across canvases, each whispering a story I longed to dive into. Spotting Jess was easy, her laughter cut through the bustling chatter like sunlight piercing through the trees. We greeted each other with enthusiastic hugs and lingering eye contact that reassured me we were still on the same wavelength. As our group settled in, sipping on our drinks and discussing everything from art to dreams, I found solace in belonging. There was a comfort in the laughter, and despite my earlier reservations, I discovered how liberating it felt just to be seen and heard. Halfway through our gathering, I excused myself for a moment and made my way to the restroom. Glancing in the mirror, I smoothed down my hair and took a deep breath. I realized that I had spent too long doubting my worth, afraid of facing discomfort and potential heartbreak. As I returned to the table, I couldn't help but smile. I was welcomed back to the group with open arms, a seat saved beside Jess. The conversation flowed, laughter crescendoed, and someone even asked about my recent painting venture, prompting a glimmer of pride within me to share my latest piece. That evening turned into an impromptu art critique followed by plans to visit galleries around town. It felt like a tapestry of warmth was woven around us all, threading kindness, creativity, and understanding together. I left the venue feeling lighter, the tension that had momentarily wrapped around my chest uncoiling like the tendrils of dawn breaking through. As I drove home, the streetlights flickering past, I reflected on the day, a mosaic of rekindled friendships, laughter shared over cappuccinos, and the beauty of allowing myself to step outside of what once felt like looming shadows. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be genuinely present with others and myself. I realized I didn't have to mold myself into someone's ideal collection of traits to find companionship. I simply needed to allow myself to exist as I was. Looking at the horizon ahead of me, painted in nothing but the gentle hues of twilight, I whispered to myself, I'm not the asshole for leaving that party, but rather, I am the architect of my own journey, and finally, I could feel that faint hope blossoming with every step I took. As I sat on our worn-out couch, my daughter curled up beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, I could feel the weight of a secret pressing against my chest like a leaden anchor, an internal struggle I had been wrestling with since the day she was born. My name is Robert, but to her, I was simply Dad, the steadfast figure of her life, the one who cheered her on every time she took her first steps, celebrated every birthday with homemade cakes, and consoled her after heartbreaks at school. You see, I am not her biological father. I was thrust into the role when my partner, Lila, found herself pregnant after a whirlwind romance with her high school sweetheart, a man who chose to disappear into the ether when she needed him the most. In the beginning, Lila had told me about her estranged relationship with the father, and though it initially felt like a burden, I found unexpected joy in becoming a father figure to little Emma. Each day with her forged an unbreakable bond that transcended blood. Yet, as she grew, so did my fears. Every giggle we shared, every bedtime story I read, felt like sand slipping through my fingers, and the question lingered in the back of my mind, when would I have to tell her the truth? The topic weighed heavily on me, especially as Emma reached her 7th birthday, an age where the innocence of childhood ebbs away, and the world outside begins to weave its intricate web of complexities. I couldn't shake off the feeling that she deserved to know who she truly was, yet the thought of shattering her perception of what a daddy meant terrified me. One evening, while we were making homemade pizza together in the kitchen, Emma's curiosity bloomed like the dough we needed. Dad, she asked, looking up at me with those big, innocent eyes, why don't I look like you? I paused, my hands momentarily frozen in motion, as countless thoughts crashed into one another. Here was my moment, the delicate thread weaving together my fears and hopes. Ignoring the knot tightening in my stomach, I chuckled nervously, well, honey, we're all unique, right? Like how pizza can have different toppings but still be delicious. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I didn't miss the glimpse of a frown crossing her tiny face, the beginnings of doubts creeping in. That night, I sprawled on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of my decision cascading over me like a heavy blanket. The idea of eventually telling her felt unbearable, yet living with the knowledge that I had kept such a monumental truth from her was gnawing at me, a constant hum in the back of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I felt the anxiety swell within me like an untamed tide, unsure of how to navigate this emotional sea. I found myself lying awake late into the night, watching as Lila slept beside me, blissfully unaware of my spiraling thoughts. I had made a promise to myself to protect Emma, to give her the happiness she deserved, but was I building her a castle on top of a fragile foundation, one that could crumble with the mere whisper of my truth? Her birthday approached, and with it, my urgency to make a choice. I decided to consult an online forum for advice, a collective of voices that could guide me through my turbulent thoughts. The responses were varied. Some suggested absolute honesty, while others urged caution, reminding me that childhood was a fleeting moment best preserved without complicating truths. The most heartfelt message came from someone who spoke of how being a father isn't defined by blood but by love and dedication, and suddenly, I felt a flicker of clarity. Finally, on a warm evening in late spring, I gathered the courage I had been seeking. I knelt down beside Emma as she played with her toys, her laughter filling the room with warmth. "Sweetie," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "can we talk for a moment?" Emma looked up, the excitement in her gaze faltering, sensing the gravity of the moment. I took a deep breath and opened my heart to her, sharing the truth about her parentage in the gentlest way possible, aware that I was walking on thinnest ice. As I spoke, I could see her processing the information, her expression a canvas of emotions, confusion, hurt, curiosity, all washing over her. What struck me was the moment her brow unfurled, replaced by a contemplative gaze. "So, you're still my dad, though, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and in that instant, the anxiety that had been swelling within me began to drain away. I nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace, reassuring her that while the way we had formed our family was different, my love for her had never wavered. In the days that followed, I learned that the bond we shared was resilient enough to withstand the storm of truth. Emma showed an incredible maturity for her age, occasionally asking questions that revealed both a depth of understanding and a deep need for reassurance. I marveled at how she processed this new information, and much to my relief, the love between us blossomed even more. But more importantly, I felt a profound sense of relief myself. The secret no longer loomed like a specter in the corners of our lives, and the soil of our family was enriched with the truth, creating space for even deeper connections. And as I navigated this new phase of our relationship, I realized that honesty didn't shatter the beautiful illusion of our family, it fortified it. I reflected often on how much I had wrestled with that dilemma, and yet, in the end, being honest with her allowed me to see the purity of love that transcends DNA. Update: several months later, as I glanced through my phone one evening, I came across an old message from the forum where I had sought advice. Surprisingly, I discovered replies to my post, people from all corners of the world sharing their own tales of blended families and truths. It was then I realized our story wasn't unique at all, so many had tread this path before me and emerged not just intact but bonded. The comforting notion washed over me that family is often forged not merely by blood but through the shared experiences, love, and resilience that we cultivate together. I leaned back into the cozy embrace of the moment, knowing that, come what may, my daughter would never question whether she belonged. She was my light, and I was her dad, forever intertwined in a tapestry of love and understanding. As I gazed at the flickering candlelight, casting comforting shadows around the room, the weight of the secret I had carried for so long began to feel both heavier and lighter at the same time. While I had crafted a life full of laughter, adventure, and love with my daughter, Amy, the thread of truth tugged at my heart. The day I received the news about my partner's unexpected pregnancy and the true nature of our relationship was one of those moments that forever redefined my perspective on family. I was not biologically linked to Amy, a fact that often lingered at the back of my mind like a faint whisper, reminding me that I was an outsider to a world I had willingly entered. Yet, as the years passed, it became increasingly clear that blood did not define my role. The myriad of bedtime stories, scraped-knee band-aids, and heartfelt conversations about her day did. Resigned to the notion that revealing this truth could shatter the innocence of our bubble, I made the choice to keep my silence, to protect her joy and the sanctuary we had built together. But as she grew more curious about her origins, her questions began to feel like gentle nudges toward a truth I couldn't continue to evade forever. They were innocent at first, simple inquiries about her features and why she looked different from me, questions that caught me off guard and sent a shiver of unease down my spine. I watched her brilliant smile fade to that of uncertainty as she probed further into her identity, and each question felt like a pressure cooker building inside my chest. I could feel the responsibility of my role as her father shift under that weight, and I was torn between my urge to cuddle her close in reassurance and the gnawing doubt of whether my silence was truly in her best interest. One evening, after reading her a story about a little girl who was brave enough to embrace her roots, Amy turned to me, her big brown eyes glistening with curiosity. "Daddy, what if we all have something special about us? What if I'm not like you?" The question caught in my throat, and I found myself caught off guard. It was as if the very universe conspired to push this secret to the forefront of our lives. Unbeknownst to me, she had been contemplating the same questions that had clouded my mind. My heart raced, realizing that the moment of truth was approaching, and I had to find a way to navigate this delicate discussion. Drawing a deep breath, I sat down with her, and in that serene space between us, I carefully crafted my words, remembering how important it was to share the love we had built over the years. "Amy," I started slowly, "you were brought into this world in the most special way, and no matter how you came to be in our family, you will always be my daughter." The way she tilted her head in slight confusion tugged at my heart. I knew I had to explain further. With each passing moment, I unraveled the layers of my past, speaking of her biological father with kindness and care, making sure she understood that a father's love is not defined merely by genetics but by actions, choices, and unwavering dedication. It was delicate, like weaving a fragile tapestry of understanding, and as I watched the pieces of her understanding shift and settle, I felt both relief and anxiety in equal measure. Her brow furrowed in contemplation, and for a moment, I held my breath, fearing what might come next. Would she feel betrayed? Alone? But as that moment stretched, the dawning recognition washed over her features, a softening in her expression, as if she had been let in on a beautiful secret. "So, my real dad is out there?" she asked, a bit of wonder coloring her tone. I nodded gently. "He is there, but it's the love I have for you every day that makes me your dad, too." It might have been a small part of our journey, but as she absorbed it all, I saw the shadows in her eyes lift as understanding graced her features. She wrapped her arms tightly around me, and in that embrace, I felt the burden lift, realizing that honesty had brought us even closer. A few weeks later, I found us sharing ice cream on a warm summer evening, laughter spilling into the air like confetti. Amid playful bites of rainbow sprinkles, Amy suddenly said with a thoughtful pout, "You know what, Daddy? It doesn't matter where I come from. I have you, and that's all that matters." My heart swelled with warmth, a familiar comfort wrapping around me as I leaned in to kiss her forehead. With her candid heart and fierce spirit, she had shown me that love truly transcends all obstacles. As we sat, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a blaze of fiery colors, I felt grateful for that moment, blessed to walk this path with her by my side, knowing we would continue to weave our experiences into a beautiful tapestry for years to come. Each day would bring its challenges, perhaps even more questions about who she was and where she came from, but I realized now that we would face them together, hand in hand, and with an eye for the love we cultivated over a lifetime. Family was not defined solely by heritage, it was the dance of trust and understanding we shared, the bridge of love spanning the depths of our differences, creating an unbreakable bond stronger than any DNA. With that notion held firmly in my heart, I returned to the present moment, feeling the warmth of our journey flow through me, shaping our narrative as something beautiful, something we could cherish forever. In that serene moment, I could almost hear the whispers of our future echoing in the soft, cozy corner of the living room where we often spent our evenings together. The flickering light from the fireplace cast gentle shadows against the walls, and I smiled as I watched my daughter, Lily, sprawled out on the floor with her vibrant coloring book, her brow furrowed in concentration as she selected the perfect shade of blue for the ocean she was creating. There was something enchanting about the way her imagination flowed free, the carefree nature of childhood radiating from her every brushstroke. As I caught a glimpse of her focused determination, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we had come since those tentative days after her mother and I had decided to marry. Admitting the truth about my relationship to Lily felt daunting, even now. The fear of shattering the world she thought she knew, filled with unconditional love and security, lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake off. But looking at her, my heart swelled with a sense of duty. I wanted her to feel the freedom to embrace her whole story, even with the complexity that it carried. It wasn't just about what she thought her origins were, it was about empowering her to see that who she was a beautiful mosaic of experiences, love, and tender moments shared with those who cared about her deeply. Days turned into weeks, and life continued to unravel its ordinary and extraordinary moments. We shared laughter over pancake breakfasts, cozy movie nights where we huddled under blankets, and simple days filled with the sweet aroma of grass and sunshine as we explored local parks. Yet in those delightful everyday encounters, the unspoken truth loomed like a soft veil, reminding me of the delicate balance between the worlds we inhabited, the one of fairy tales and the one of reality. Each evening, as we tucked ourselves into bed, I found myself weighing the power of honesty against the comfort of fiction. Could the truth truly coexist with her innocent understanding of life? I never wanted to be the one to fracture the lens through which she viewed her little universe. As I watched her drift off to sleep, curled up with her favorite plush toy, all I could think was how much I wanted to shield her from any possible hurt. Then came the day that shifted everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone while waiting for Lily to return from school, when an email from her teacher flashed on screen. At first, I felt my heart race in alarm as I read the subject line, Family Tree Project. Lily had mentioned it a few days prior, her eyes sparkling with the excitement of creativity and knowledge, but all at once, a knot formed in my stomach. The assignment asked the children to bring in a family tree detailing their lineage, including pictures and stories about their ancestry. For a quick second, I considered reaching out to the teacher, confessing my circumstances, but the thought of drawing even more attention to our non-traditional family sent my anxiety skyrocketing. If this was a test of her knowledge of who she belonged to, would Lily's heart break realizing I wasn't who she thought I was? When she bounded through the door later that afternoon, I held my breath, forcing an encouraging smile. "Hey, sweetheart. How was school today?" I asked, knowing I was stepping into the unknown. Her face lit with delight at the mention of her project as she began recounting each detail, her enthusiasm contagious. The colors, the stickers, the stories she'd heard about her grandparents, it all poured from her lips like a warm stream. It was during those moments that I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me, filling me with a mix of admiration and unease. As she unfolded her plans for the family tree, it dawned upon me that I would have to navigate this delicate situation with grace and thoughtfulness. As we sat together, Lily busily cutting out images to represent the various family members she would include, I found my heart racing. I knew I couldn't put off the inevitable much longer. But as I watched her sigh after completing her art project, a soft smile gracing her face, I realized she was so incredibly proud of what she was creating. Instead of rushing toward that uncomfortable confrontation, I felt compelled to help her frame the narrative. You know, Lily, I began gently, family can be made up of many different branches and roots. Although some families look like a super elaborate tree, others might be more like a patchwork quilt of love. She looked up at me with her big, curious eyes, prompting me to continue. What if we made this tree reflect all the people in your life who matter, those who love you just the way you are? It could be really special to include me, your mom, your grandparents, and anyone else you adore. As she pondered my words, a flicker of realization seemed to dance in her gaze, her creativity evidently igniting a deeper understanding of what family truly means. Can I put stickers for my favorite friends? She asked brightly, and I couldn't help but chuckle, a wave of relief washing over me as I saw her spirit flourish. It felt like a small victory, perhaps this was my child's first step toward embracing a broader definition of family. Embracing that ambiguity would give her strength and resilience in navigating this winding path. By the time the project was finished, I realized that I, too, had begun to rewrite my own story. As she proudly displayed the completed family tree artwork on the fridge, a beautiful representation of our unconventional yet profound connection, I felt the weight of my fear slowly evaporate, replaced with warmth and positivity. Our past would forever remain part of us, but love was the true anchor for our future. And as I tucked her into bed that night, I whispered the words I had nearly forgotten to say. You are my heart, Lily. Always. In her sleepy eyes, I finally saw the reflection of trust. The weight of my challenge hadn't vanished, but I sensed the worry for the future, if only momentarily, felt lighter as I closed the door, heart full with a deep hope. Now, it seemed our intertwined tapestry would only continue to grow richer and more beautiful in the moments that followed. It was a chill evening on New Year's Eve, the kind that held the promise of frozen fingers and warm hearts, but all I could think about was the weight of last year's responsibilities hanging over me like an unwelcome storm cloud. I could hear my family laughing and cheering in the living room while I sat on the wooden steps just outside the house, the chill penetrating through my jeans as I watched the colorful lights twinkle against the night sky. My name is Sam, and for the past 3 years, I had become the designated driver every single holiday. I loved my family, no doubt, but as the laughter echoed in the background, I couldn't help but feel a mix of resentment and exhaustion building within me. The beer-soaked promises of one last wild night had turned into a repetitive ritual where everyone else got to indulge while I faded into the shadows, always the one stuck waiting to make sure the fun didn't drive anyone into a ditch. The irony stung, especially when sort of a family tradition drew me away from the joy of the occasion. I knew I wasn't the type to start trouble, but tonight felt different. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of expectations, a weight I had carried alone for far too long. So as midnight approached and my siblings began their enthusiastic chants of "Let's hit the town," while simultaneously cracking open drinks like it was an Olympic sport, I made the choice to step back. I decided I wouldn't partake this year, wouldn't shove the corks back into their champagne bottles or preemptively decline the drinks proffered to me. Instead, I summoned the nerve to voice what had been festering in my heart, and I found my father first, his hair turning silver under the living room lights, his laugh resonating like the chime of a joyful bell. "Dad, I need to talk," I said, feeling the lump of anxiety building in my throat. The laughter died down momentarily, and a palpable shift in the atmosphere flickered. "I'm not going to be the designated driver tonight." My family looked at me as though I had declared war on New Year's itself. The disappointment in their eyes stung more than I had anticipated, and while they, of course, understood the role I had played in our new tradition, my refusal was met with confusion followed by rising irritation, not just from my siblings but even from the adults who had initially cheered for my sacrifice. I heard the murmurs growing louder. "What do you mean? It's just one night. And come on, Sam, don't ruin it for us," echoed all around. My heart sank deeper with every voice, and doubts began worming their way into my mind. Could I really be that selfish? Was I truly ruining something so beautiful that we had shared? It felt as if guilt was wrapping around me like a tight blanket, smothering any hope of relief I had briefly felt. But just as quickly as the waves of uncertainty crashed in, they receded slightly when I decided to lay down my own terms. I proposed that we could all celebrate at home, together, no bar, no drunken escapades, just the five of us playing games, laughing, and counting down to the new year in the comfort of our own space. My mother's pleading eyes softened as they met mine, and I saw that she understood my need for balance. After a brief but intense back and forth that fizzled into silence, they ultimately agreed, albeit reluctantly. As we set up for a night under the glow of fairy lights and the warmth of shared laughter, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had carved an opening in the dam of expectations that had held me captive. We settled down to play games, eating homemade snacks, and toasting with soda as if we were the most sophisticated group of partygoers. In those moments of laughter, it became painfully clear that I had not ruined New Year's Eve. Rather, I allowed the festivity to shift from an obligation to a genuine celebration of connection that had felt lost amidst the chaos of tradition. Midnight arrived, and we cheered as one. I found myself wishing this would become our new ritual instead of the frantic runs to the bar and the drunken chaos our nights had often turned into. Now, reflecting on that chaotic night, I realized this was not merely an act of defiance but a necessary step towards reclaiming my joy in the midst of expectations. Everyone called it the most memorable New Year they had experienced since childhood, and I smiled a little when I recalled the surprise and glee in their eyes. Still, a small knot of anxiety clung to me, eager to know if my stance had indeed bruised familial bonds or somehow deepened them in the quiet of our shared moments. It wasn't until I received a text from my brother a few weeks later, thanking me for that evening, that I finally exhaled. "We can always go out next year, but I'm glad you stood your ground. It's time we return to what really matters," he said. I know now that sometimes, to embrace soul-deep happiness, one has to willingly stand against the tide and carve out their own space, catching tranquility amidst the noise. After all, joy doesn't only lie in the indulgence of reckless abandon but in the laughter exchanged in simple moments with the people we love the most. As the snow began to melt, revealing patches of earth long hidden beneath the winter's blanket, I found myself reflecting on my brother's message more often than I expected. It was odd how something that had started as a tense confrontation about my role as the designated driver had blossomed into a deeper conversation about our family's values. I spent time thinking about the chaos of that New Year's Eve, the loud music, the clinking glasses full of champagne, and the hazy laughter that seemed to surround everyone but me. Although I had been holding the weight of bitterness for being left out while my family indulged, my brother's kind words encouraged me to let that go. Life carried on, as it tends to do. Spring teased us with its gentle warmth, coaxing the world back into color. Yet, a sense of calm lingered like a forgotten melody from the past, and I began to crave more of that simplicity, more of those genuine, heartwarming gatherings that felt like home. I started initiating these moments, hosting small get-togethers where laughter and conversation flowed freely. We played board games, cooked meals together, and relished in the joy that came from spending time as a family without the distractions of a raucous night out. One Saturday evening, I invited my family over for dinner, fully knowing my mother would undoubtedly bring her infamous baked ziti and my father would come armed with a bottle of red wine that had likely been aging since before I was born. As the familiar smells wafted through the air, I took a moment to appreciate how much it meant to have the people I loved gathered in one spot, free from the pressures of expectation or indulgence. We began to share stories about our lives, and it was during this gathering that I realized my younger sister hadn't been quite herself lately. While everyone chuckled uproariously at my dad's corny jokes, I watched her face, which carried a glimmer of sadness behind her smile. Later in the evening, I pulled her aside into the quiet of the kitchen while the others continued their merriment in the dining room. She looked at me hesitantly, and my heart sank. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft and concerned. What unfolded was a tapestry of emotions, as she revealed worries about her own life decisions, feeling lost and pressured to keep up appearances. "I wish I could just be happy without feeling like I have to do what everyone expects," she confided, and in that moment, her words struck a chord deep within me. I wanted to tell her about the clarity I'd found since that tumultuous New Year's Eve, how it was okay to forge our unique paths in search of what genuine happiness felt like, but instead, I simply hugged her tightly. She seemed surprised, but after a moment, she melted into the embrace. As weeks continued to unravel, I saw my family transform, all of us nursing sprouted seeds of newfound understanding. Our gatherings morphed into mini rituals of love, no longer needing the chaos of parties or the allure of nightlife to find joy. We went on picnics at the local park, took day trips to the coast, and even set up a movie night under the stars in my backyard. Each time we gathered, unfiltered laughter echoed and the glimmers of hope rose in our hearts. Then, one evening, as the summer sun dipped below the horizon, bathing everything in amber light, my brother called me. "You know, I've been thinking," he said, his tone slightly hesitant, "I miss the way we used to celebrate the holidays without the stress." I hadn't expected that vulnerability from him, and it felt good to know that my stand held weight not just for myself, but for all of us. "Me too," I replied, a warmth spreading through my chest. "Let's promise each other that next New Year's, we create our own version of what celebration means to us, just us." As we spoke, I felt a bittersweet exhilaration. The new understanding among us transformed our previous traditions into something deeper, a rhythm that reflected who we had become rather than who we used to be. I realized then that standing my ground had sparked a revolution of sorts, in the form of connection and understanding within my family. It was a journey of rediscovery, where we learned that self-advocacy could pave the way for authentic relationships. And as the next New Year's Eve approached, I no longer felt the heaviness of the past, rather, I carried a placid certainty that our celebration would be remembered for its simplicity rather than revelry, for its acceptance rather than pressure. Reflecting once more on the past year, I understood more clearly now that shifting tides, though daunting, could lead us back to the shores of our own happiness, where the heart is light, laughter is abundant, and every moment spent together feels like a gift. I smiled at the thought of it all. Sometimes, to catch tranquility amidst the noise, you simply have to be brave enough to carve your own path. As the days passed into the new year, I often found myself thinking of my brother's text, his words echoing in my mind like gentle reminders of the importance of authenticity. It was invigorating, really, to feel that I had been true to myself, allowing the roots of tradition to pull us closer rather than tear us apart. My family had always been like a tightly wound clock, each spinning hand representing a different personality, a distinct desire. But somewhere along the way, we had lost the harmony of a simple timepiece, opting instead for a dazzling but chaotic illusion of celebration. I found solace in knowing that I had helped reorient that clock just a little, allowing us to tick in rhythm once again. New Year's Day dawned brightly, the winter sun streaming through the frosted windows, painting the room in hues of gold. The warmth of family filled the air, laughter erupting as my nieces and nephews darted around, their tiny feet patting eagerly across the floors, picking up on a contagious energy that promised adventure in the mundane. We gathered around the table, a feast of comfort food laid before us, rich with the sense of roasted meats and home-baked breads, and that familiar twinge of nostalgia pulled me back to childhood. We shared stories, moments of joy, heartache, and past resolutions colliding in a beautiful mess of chatter and shared laughter. I felt a swell of gratitude watching my parents, their faces softened with age but animated with love, gleaming as they witnessed the whirl of activity. My mother glided in with a tray of desserts, her smile radiating warmth, and for a moment I was reminded of the countless New Year's celebrations we had inadvertently sidelined for busier, more extravagant gatherings. Wandering through the gentle living room chatter, thumping music, and the intoxicating aroma of baked goods, I recalled the feeling of disillusionment I had once held about family gatherings. There was something so profoundly satisfying about stepping back and creating a quieter kind of connection, one untainted by expectations. We played board games that day, nothing elaborate, just the classics that brought a sense of familiarity and connection. I felt the worries of the past year melt away in those moments, absorbed in the simple joy of companionship, shared victories, and playful banter. My sister and I shared glances often, nodding knowingly, our hearts full as we recalled that fateful New Year's Eve of change. As evening drew near, and the sun sunk low, the golden light outside transformed into soft hues of lavender and indigo. I took a moment to step outside, breathing in the crisp air filled with the sense of pine and freshly fallen snow. I stood quietly on the porch, letting the chill wrap around me. From where I stood, I could hear laughter bouncing off the walls of our home, the sound resonating like music through the night. In that serene moment, I pondered how the world outside felt cold and chaotic, yet within the walls, everything was warm, safe, and messy, real. As I reflected on my decision from that previous New Year's Eve, I realized it wasn't about refusing fun or indulging in dullness, it was about saying yes to connection over chaos, love over obligations. I had discovered a new definition of joy. When I finally stepped back inside, the raucous laughter enveloped me like a long-lost friend. My heart soared as my brother rushed over to claim his turn at the board game, and I noticed the unspoken unity that hung in the air around us, an evolution from past mistakes into something beautifully different. As midnight approached, we all gathered, ready to face the upcoming decade together, a family again in tune with one another. When the clock struck 12, we exchanged hugs, whispered wishes for the year ahead, and breathed together in the promise of what was to come. There, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the warmth of shared hearts, I understood that the path I chose had not just changed my journey but had rekindled a bond that was stronger and more assertive than ever, reminding me that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to embrace the ordinary. The richness of those moments would remain, timeless and golden, echoing softly in the chambers of our hearts. I still remember the sound of my heart thumping in my chest, a primal rhythm interrupted only by the low hum of chatter from the family gathering. Christmas had always been a chaotic blend of laughter and light amidst the stress of looming responsibilities. But this year felt different, it felt heavy. My Uncle Harold was the center of attention, regaling everyone with elaborate tales of his upcoming surprise vacation to the Maldives for his daughter's Christmas gift, a trip that might as well have been a vacation of the gods. A sun-soaked getaway, oceans kissed by golden rays, while I sat a mere 10 feet away, feeling the tightening knot of resentment coiling in my stomach, the air thick with something bitter and unspoken. Just a few months back, he had borrowed $700 from me, promising to pay it back by summer, but summer had turned to fall and was now fading into winter, and here he was, talking about flopping on a beach while I was left holding the weight of unpaid debts and dwindling savings. The world outside the window streaked with winter sleet seemed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched life he was about to embark upon. I hadn't begrudged him his joy, but as he continued to expound on the grandeur of this vacation, my fingers involuntarily clenched around my glass, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the warmth of the room, the lights twinkling merrily above us, while my thoughts swirled with unease and doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to feel this way about family? They say money and family don't mix, and yet here I was, struggling to reconcile my love for my family with the hurt of when it felt like we were no longer on the same playing field. With every laugh and cheer from the gathered relatives, I felt the walls closing in around me, pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought about his daughter, how this vacation would be something magical for her, a memory that would last a lifetime. But that didn't change the fact that I needed that money, too: bills, groceries, a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole worn through the sole. And then something snapped inside me, birthed from a mix of frustration and desperation. My voice broke the laughter like a sudden winter chill cutting through warm air, and I caught everyone's attention, all faces looking towards me. "Harold, can we talk about that loan?" The room fell quiet, the joyful energy draining from my words as the focus shifted from dreams of sun-soaked bliss to the heavy topic of debt. Harold looked taken aback, his expression shifting from jovial to defensive, his boastful demeanor deflating like an untied balloon. "What are you talking about?" he replied, the twinkle in his eye replaced by something darker. I could feel the weight of my words, like stones thrown into a placid lake, rippling out to the circles of family surrounding us. "The $700 you borrowed? I really need it back." There was an awkward silence, filled with muffled gasps and glances exchanged between family members, their expressions a mix of shock and, I could swear, a hint of contempt. I'd broken an unspoken convention, drawn back the curtain that shielded our family's fragile dynamics. Harold bristled, his pride wounded yet hidden behind a facade of casual irritation. "Come on, you know I'm good for it," he replied, the bravado slipping back into his tone. "This trip is for Sarah, don't make this about money now." But it was all about the money I had graciously lent him in confidence, thinking I'd be repaid before the year turned another page. I saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, fleeting yet sharp. I pressed on, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I shouldn't have to feel guilty for needing what's already mine. I saved up for ages to lend it to you." The conversation dwindled into muffled complaints from Harold and whispers from the other relatives. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away as the anger simmered beneath the surface. It felt excruciating yet liberating to have put it out there, a gaping wound laid bare that couldn't be sewn shut. In that moment, I realized the cost wasn't just material, it struck at the very heart of familial trust, turning us both into strangers fighting for something that had once been given freely. The evening wore on, and Harold eventually retreated from the conversation, a shadowy figure reclaiming the spotlight with half-hearted laughter. But I had crossed a threshold, and though the breadcrumbs of resentment might linger, I felt a strange lightness, an acknowledgement of my own needs amid the familial chaos. The unease didn't dissolve entirely, but I found peace in confronting the truth, and I experienced the beginnings of guilt dissipating, leaving space for clarity in its wake. A few days post-Christmas, I received a text from my uncle, a simple "Hey, let's get together, I'd like to clear the air." He'd agreed to pay me back in installments, starting with the first next week. I felt a rush of mixed emotions as I read the message. Relief washed over me, yes, but with it came a creeping wish that things didn't have to be difficult, ignited by the knowledge that confronting him had altered our relationship forever, shifting some foundational floorboards that would never return to their original status. I realized then, processing this new ground we stood upon, that sometimes, families could only rediscover themselves through honesty, grimy and raw as it may feel, but worth the discomfort for the sake of healing. As the weeks progressed, I found myself caught in a curious limbo. Each time my phone pinged with a message, my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, anticipation for a glimpse of the man I'd once called my uncle and anxiety about what each check-in would herald. His first payment arrived promptly the following Friday. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope that bore my name, the familiar handwriting inside. It felt strange, like crossing forbidden ground, as if opening that envelope would further peel away the layers of our relationship, revealing the raw truth beneath. The moment I pulled out the check, a wave of relief surged through me, quickly followed by an echoing reminder of his promises. The feeling was bittersweet. I was grateful for the money, of course, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. That Sunday, family dinner rolled around, and with it came a palpable tension gnawing at the corners of my mind. We gathered in my parents' living room, the air thick with the scent of my mom's famous roast. Laughter bubbled up around the room as my relatives exchanged jovial stories, their raucousness contrasting sharply with my internal struggle. I could see my uncle from across the room, dapper in a sharp suit that made him look 10 years younger than his age. He was animatedly sharing plans for the trip to the Maldives, his daughter perched atop the arm of the couch, her excitement radiating. She beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the cautious glances exchanged between her older cousins and me. Each vivid detail he described felt like a dagger to my gut. The sun-drenched beaches, the luxurious villa, the words dripped with privilege while the reality of his debt loomed heavy behind them. I swallowed hard, recalling our conversation from a few weeks back, the discomfort we'd navigated, and the truth I had dared to share. Eventually, I caught my uncle's eye. His expression shifted instantly. Gone was the carefree demeanor he wore when speaking of the Maldives. Instead, it was replaced with something akin to shame, or perhaps just a flicker of guilt. I hesitated, wondering if I should follow through with this newfound understanding between us, or allow silence to wrap around us like a thick fog. But as the evening wore on, the bravado in his words became harder to listen to. The laughter felt hollow. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus on a game of charades unfolding nearby, but inside, I was seething, a simmering pot about to boil over. Then, as if on cue, the family buzzed around, exchanging placid nods, all oblivious to the storm swirling in my mind. I stood up abruptly, meeting him halfway across the room, and as I did, time felt suspended. I couldn't fully articulate what drove me to speak, but the warmth of his laughter abruptly halted as I reached him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above the restaurant chatter that reverberated around us. His face paled slightly as he glanced over at my parents, then nodded stiffly. We stepped into the adjacent kitchen, the cacophony of family momentarily muffled behind the door. "About the Maldives," I started, carefully measuring my words, "it's just..." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't understand how you can afford that when you owe me $700. There was a pregnant pause, and I could feel the air thickening between us. His eyes flickered with indignation before his shoulders slumped, exhaustion crumpling his facade. "You're right," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. The honesty in his tone caught me by surprise, a raw admission that echoed back through the familial halls we wandered. In that space, I sensed the weight of secrecy being lifted, if only slightly. As we stood there, the conversation slowly unwound, the debts, the choices he'd made, the regrets he wished he could reclaim. I saw him, not as my uncle who flaunted his apparent wealth, but as a flawed man grappling with his own decisions, navigating the murky waters of his life just as I was navigating mine. Both of us had been on different paths, yet somehow, we arrived at the same crossroads. It was hauntingly familiar. When we exited the kitchen, I felt lighter, as if the dark clouds surrounding us had drifted apart even just a little. In the weeks that followed, my uncle resumed his payments, each one a silent promise that allowed us to rebuild an invisible bridge that spanned the chasm between us. Conversations became more open, and laughter wasn't forced anymore. It returned, gradually, restoring warmth to our gatherings. Eventually, he began to involve me in his plans, allowing me to express my dreams of traveling, not to the Maldives, but to places I yearned to see, and I recognized the transformation. I understood deeply now that confronting the hard truths had not obliterated our relationship, rather, it had reformed its very foundation. As Christmas approached, I found myself wondering more and more about the nature of family, the enduring bonds that tied us to one another, for better and for worse. Something closer to understanding blossomed. Perhaps, in our raw exchanges, we were somehow rediscovering the essence of connection, imperfect yet precious. Then, one cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside and the warmth of the season settled in our home, I received another tantalizing message from him, one that read simply, "Let's plan a family trip together next year, somewhere we can all go." It felt like an invitation to venture forth into unknown territory, and to that, I found myself wholeheartedly saying yes, feeling the comfort of adventure awaiting us, perhaps captured in the warmth of honesty instead of the weight of pretense. As I read his message, a rush of excitement coursed through me, merging with the ghosts of my earlier uncertainty. The thought of a family trip was exhilarating, like the first breath of fresh air after being inside on a stuffy day. I imagined us laughing together, making new memories, and perhaps even healing some of the rifts that had widened in our conversations. I envisioned sandy beaches and lush landscapes, places where we could leave behind the heaviness of family dynamics and indulge in pure joy, if only for a while. Nestled in the corner of my living room, with the faint smell of pine wafting from our modest Christmas tree, I couldn't suppress a smile. My heart swelled at the thought of reconciliation, of letting go of past grievances and embracing what lay ahead. In the following days leading up to the holidays, our conversations took on a newfound lightness. He opened up about his life in ways I hadn't expected, his struggles at work and the weight of being the family's financial provider. It felt surreal, sharing laughter about his daughter's seemingly endless wish list while in his shadow lay the burden of the previous debts and disappointments we had navigated. I caught myself thinking about how daunting the prospect of taking my family on a shared journey had once seemed, overshadowed by prior confrontations. Yet, here we were, mapping out a future that sparkled with possibilities. As we began planning the trip, each message exchanged felt like stitches weaving the fabric of our connection tighter. We explored myriad destinations, from tropical paradises to mountain retreats. My uncle's daughter chimed in with her ideas, and so too did my siblings, each contributing their wishes and hopes for this journey. There was something wonderfully liberating about immersing ourselves in a collective dream, a shared experience that bound us together through laughter and imagination rather than the weight of expectation or disappointment. The past, with all its burdens, faded into the background for those fleeting moments, and the prospect of adventure glimmered ahead like glistening snow under the winter sun. However, as the planning intensified, I found myself grappling with another wave of emotions. The shadow of my uncle's debt lingered in the back of my mind, creeping in like a winter chill despite the warmth of our newfound camaraderie. Would I be able to fully embrace this trip, carefree and lighthearted, knowing he still owed me? A part of me wanted to push the thought aside, to submerge the nagging feeling in a tidal wave of optimism, while another urged me to confront this lingering discomfort. I reasoned with myself that perhaps this is what forgiveness looked like, the conscious choice to move forward despite unresolved tensions, to embrace joy while still holding space for the healing that needed to occur. The weeks rolled on, and soon enough, the trip was finalized. We had settled on a tropical island with golden beaches and azure waters. As Christmas approached, I felt more connected with my family than I had in years, every message imbued with the fragility and strength of our shared journey. But the night before our departure, while bustling to pack, an unexpected reminder hit me when I stumbled across a handwritten note my uncle had sent long ago, the one where he'd promised to repay the debt. It was a small piece of paper with irregular handwriting, like a phantom drifting through my memories, a promise made during a time when things felt lighter, when the looming shadow of financial stress hadn't yet clouded our interactions. In that moment, all my emotional progress felt attacked. Conflicted by the weight of my own conscience, I decided to send him a simple text, an olive branch submerged in vulnerability. "I'm genuinely excited for the trip, but I can't shake the feeling about the debt." He replied instantly, "Let's discuss it when we're away. I want to enjoy this break with you." Deep down, I appreciated his resolve to prioritize positivity over doubt, yet the flicker of unease within me charged the air like static electricity. As we arrived at the island, every moment was filled with laughter and light, the seashells sharp against our footprints in the sand. My uncle appeared to be genuinely enjoying precious time with his daughter, capturing memories in photographs that would surely warm our hearts in years to come, while I felt the shift within myself, an acceptance of the messiness of family. Yet, the acknowledgement of debts unresolved lingered, almost like a character in its own right, standing just outside the joyous frame of our vacation. I realized then how complicated it is to straddle the line between past pain and present joy, between memories that bind us and those that wound us. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I knew I had to confront my uncle once more, my heart heavy but resolution firm. We strolled along the beach, the waves caressing our ankles, making the moment feel surreal. As the sky faded to twilight, I turned to him, prepared for the delicate balance of honesty and hope I had carried from home. "It's been an incredible trip, but we need to talk about some things when we return," I began, "about the debt. I want us both to feel free moving forward." He looked at me, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and sighed warmly as he nodded, granting me a sense of relief as the uncertain weight began to lift. Reflecting on it, I realized there might never be a perfect time to confront issues that cling to family dynamics like sea salt in air, and while the elements of debt still hung, our shared joy illuminated so much more. In vulnerability lies freedom. Sometimes, that's where the trips of a lifetime begin. I have this recurring dream, the kind that stays with you long after you wake up, lingering at the edges of your consciousness like a familiar fog. In it, I'm back in my small apartment, the walls adorned with mismatched memorabilia from my childhood, and the glow of the television casts soft shadows across the clutter. I'd curled up on the couch, a spirited mixture of pillows and warm blankets, with the familiar theme song of my absolute comfort show echoing in my ears. If there's anything uniting my college friends and me over the years, it's the series we could watch a million times and never tire of, That Cozy Life. It's a quirky sitcom about a group of friends maneuvering through life's ups and downs, with quirky plots that always ended in heartwarming moments and the kind of humor that felt like a hug. One evening, while taking a break from my work, I decided to indulge in a binge-watch session. I reached the episode where one of the characters, Elizabeth, confronts her insecurities when her childhood friend returns to town with a life that seems so picture-perfect. As the weight of her feelings washed over her, I felt a pang of recognition ripple through me. It was subtle yet profound, an uninvited reminder of the mounting pressure I felt about my own life choices. You see, I graduated with a degree in literature a year prior, but while my friends soared into burgeoning careers, I found myself working part-time at a local bookstore, surrounded by the musty scent of old pages while my dreams remained wedged between the spines of books I longed to write. I began to question everything, feeling much like my on-screen counterpart caught in a storm of self-doubt, waiting for that breakthrough moment. It was during this time that I reconnected with Mia, my childhood best friend who had left our sleepy town to conquer the big city. In a flurry of excited messages, we agreed to meet up, and I desperately hoped she would bring with her the kind of ambition that once inspired me. When we finally met, we sat in our favorite cafe, the smell of fresh coffee enveloping us as we reminisced about those blissful days of youth that seemed so simplistic in retrospect. Yet as she spoke about her fast-paced life filled with exciting opportunities and endless networking, I could feel my own insecurities rising like a tide. Her sizable success felt intimidating, and my aspirations felt small and silly, as if I'd pitifully missed the memo on how to transform dreams into reality. The hours melted away, but my feelings of inadequacy only deepened. It was then that the memory of That Cozy Life flickered back into my mind, specifically its ability to weave lessons into its lighthearted fabric. I could almost hear Elizabeth's voice saying that success wasn't just a straight path but a winding road filled with bumps and detours, better shared with friends who understood your journey. Finding comfort in this thought, I invited Mia to watch an episode with me, hoping it would create a moment of connection, even in our divergent paths. Surprisingly, she agreed. We laughed until our sides hurt while watching Elizabeth's comedic misadventures and heart-forward journey. When the finale credits rolled, I shared with Mia how the show had always been my safe haven, a means to escape whenever I felt overwhelmed by the real world. In return, she opened up about her struggles with feeling lonely despite her successes, revealing that behind the glimmering facade, she often craved the depth of true connection, something our bond once provided effortlessly. It felt liberating, sharing our vulnerabilities, almost like we were both characters in an episode, two old friends who wandered off script only to find their way back together. By the dusk of that evening, the weight of the world felt lighter, the connection we re-established was profound yet simple. Little did I know that this reconciliation would serve as the catalyst for my journey toward embracing my dreams without the harsh lens of comparison. The days turned into weeks as I found solace in rewatching my beloved series whenever I felt the pressures of adult life creeping up again, allowing those comforting episodes to remind me of the importance of my own narrative. As the months rolled by, I slowly began to pen my own stories, starting with daily snippets inspired by moments observed at the bookstore, drawings from our cafe escapades, and the laughter shared in those newly forged memories. Just the other night, I received a message from Mia that made my heart flutter. She relayed how she'd been watching That Cozy Life too, and found every episode echoing her doubts and aspirations, much like mine. With a burst of excitement and courage, I told her about my new writing project and asked if she'd consider being a beta reader. With her enthusiastic response, I realized the comfort show that warmed our hearts had woven its lessons tightly into our lives, allowing us to share paths filled with uncertainty but also ignited by mutual support and understanding. Life may not be a neatly wrapped sitcom, but as we both learned, it can be just as beautiful to find warmth in familiar ties. I figured sharing my journey on a Reddit thread could lead to further connections and reflections, so I posted under Confessions, hoping to find others who felt similarly. The supportive feedback rolled in, weaving a new network of friendships across the digital expanse. The Comfort Show had not only offered me solace but introduced me to a community that mirrored the support I truly needed. In retrospect, I realized that while we may never achieve the perfection portrayed on screen, embracing our flawed but vibrant stories transforms mere comfort into genuine courage. The cozy moments tend to hold the most strength, don't they? After all, life is a series of episodes, each rich in its small imperfections and lessons, echoing through laughter and connection. What more could one ask for in the grand script of our lives? As I settled back into my usual routine, I found myself reflecting on the warmth the show had brought into my life, a warmth that seemed to resonate long after the closing credits rolled. I remember binge-watching the series late at night, the glow from the screen wrapping around me like an old, comforting blanket. But it wasn't just the storyline that captivated me, it was the profound sense of understanding I felt from the characters who faced their own struggles, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability. They became friends I never met, existing in a world where flaws were celebrated rather than hidden. Each time I started another rewatch, the familiar dialogue and laughter flowed through my apartment as if it had seeped into every corner, transforming my space into a sanctuary away from the chaos outside. I began sharing my experience with this series on an online forum, weaving together the intricate details of my own life with those of the characters. I reminisced about how the protagonist, with their struggles to find balance between work and relationships, echoed my own internal battles. When I pressed send on my post, I felt a sense of dread, waiting for either silence or criticism, but instead, my inbox flooded with sympathetic messages and stories from others who felt the same. Each interaction became a moment of connection, reminding me that we are all spinning in our own orbits yet inevitably drawn to one another, like planets in a grand cosmic dance. But it was during one late-night reply to a fellow user, their story similar to mine, their struggles palpable, that a twist emerged. They shared how this comfort show had inadvertently helped them cope with their own mental health issues, and it struck a chord in me. I thought of the nights I had sat paralyzed by anxiety, the series lightening my heavy heart, and suddenly felt compelled to give back in some small way. I began organizing virtual watch parties, inviting all those who had reached out, creating a space where we could engage over our shared love for the show. The first gathering felt electric. I could almost hear the pulse of the collective as laughter erupted with every punchline and nostalgic moment. We traveled through our favorite episodes together, voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony of commentary, and in those moments, something remarkable happened. I felt a shift. The heaviness that had lingered in my chest for months began to slip away, replaced by the buoyancy of new friendships forged in the glow of our beloved series. Each gathering deepened our connections, unraveling layers of vulnerability, humor, and warmth, and we soon found ourselves discussing everything from life dreams to fears, so intimate and real it felt surreal. But as the weeks passed and winter settled in outside my window, I noticed one of the participants, Jamie, grew quiet. Their laughter had once been infectious, but during our last meeting, it felt distant, as if a shadow had fallen over their spirit. Concerned, I reached out privately, checking in and sharing my worry. It wasn't long before Jamie replied, spilling their heart out in a series of messages. They spoke of feeling lost, adrift in a world that seemed increasingly isolating, weighed down by expectations, and how the solace they found in our gatherings had begun to feel like a highlight against the drudgeries of life. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't just the spectator of my show anymore, I was an active participant in someone else's story. I suggested we have a one-on-one call where we could talk openly, just the two of us. That night, as we spoke, a vulnerability emerged, raw and beautiful. Jamie shared their dreams of pursuing art, their struggles with rejection, and their longing for connection. I listened intently, offering encouragement and sharing my own fears of inadequacy, and as the conversation flowed, it felt like we were crafting our own narrative, one of resilience and hope. Days turned into weeks, and Jamie and I became inseparable during our virtual meetups. With each discussion, we stretched out our dreams and uncertainties like threads, weaving them into something new and vibrant. Inspired by our dynamic, we decided to host a live episode commentary on our favorite parts, creating a new series of posts for those in the community to join us. It was a success. The chat rooms lit up with excitement, the joy felt like fireworks bursting across a darkened sky. In the end, Jamie and I both realized something profound, that our comfort show, while cherished, was never truly the star of the universe. It was the friendships born from it that shone the brightest. Reflecting on this journey, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most transformative moments come not from the escapism of a favorite episode, but from the connections we foster while embracing our imperfections with courage. Life, after all, had become its own blend of sitcom unpredictability and heartfelt emotional depth, and I was more than ready for the next season to begin. Even amid the uncertainty, I knew, as the credits rolled on this chapter of our story, there was always room for another laugh, another episode, and another friend. I could hardly wait to see what came next, ready to watch the unfolding tapestry of our lives together, the comfort show continuing to inspire us in ways we were only just beginning to understand. In the days that followed, the haze of uncertainty began to lift. I found myself immersed in the online community crafted around our beloved comfort show. Late-night discussions bubbled with animated spontaneity and earnest reflections, while the threads of personal anecdotes intertwined with favorite scenes and shared quotes, forming a tapestry of camaraderie both sweet and reassuring. It was a safe haven. During one particularly quiet evening, I curled up on my couch wearing my favorite oversized sweatshirt, the glow of my laptop illuminating my excitedly furrowed brows. I opened a thread titled Life Lessons from My Comfort Show, and the posts poured in, mirroring our myriad experiences through our shared lens. I read about someone who had lost their job but found the courage to chase their dream of starting a bakery, channeling the spirit of the quirky character we all loved who had redefined failure into a zesty journey of personal reinvention. I smiled at the words of another, who had battled anxiety by replicating the show's unpredictable bravery through small, conscious steps in their daily life. It was like witnessing a series of life scripts intertwining with our favorite sitcom moments, each anecdote brimming with vulnerability and hope. As I watched the clock slide past midnight, a sense of anticipation electrified the air, urging me to take the plunge. A post began forming in my mind, a confession of sorts, combining my personal struggles and an honest tribute to the influence the show had had on my life. With deliberate movements, I started typing. I wrote about how comforting it was to have my own version of that friend from the show who nudged me to embrace spontaneity, urging me to venture out into life rather than waiting for it to come to me. I unconsciously penned down how the catchphrases hovering in our lexicon had shifted from being mere jokes to becoming mantras I whispered to myself during panic-stricken moments. Each sentence flowed easily, my fears spilling out in delicate bursts of honesty. The screen glowed brightly as I finally typed, "In a world painted with anxiety and uncertainties, I find solace in our shared laughter, the connection through flawed characters who echo my own story. Sometimes, I dare to hope I can embody their courage, even if just a little." Once posted, I didn't expect much, anticipating the regular ebb and flow of online life. Yet, within hours, my notifications began to light up like a festival of digital camaraderie. People were sharing their own reflections, building this comforting bridge between their narratives and mine. I found sort of a strange magic in the shared vulnerabilities, the strengths and weaknesses in our piece of the comfort show's vast landscape. Every reply added a new glimmer of hope, a ripple of joy punctuated with laughter. One response, in particular, caught my eye, a message from someone named Jamie, who relayed how they had started their own podcast to discuss similar themes, referencing an episode that mirrored my confession. They wrote, "Let's collaborate. It feels like our stories could guide one another." I realized then that sometimes, behind a computer screen, extraordinary connections form from the simplest of words. As weeks turned into months, Jamie and I began our collaboration, diving deep into the themes interwoven in our lives and our comfort show. We created a small but passionate audience who resonated with our stories of awkwardness, courage, love, and friendship. The podcast blossomed, allowing both of us to explore our thoughts and feelings publicly yet intimately, as if we were peeling back the layers of vulnerability together, like two characters in our very own heartwarming episode. With each new recording session, I could feel my initial hesitations melt away, replaced by an eagerness to share my voice, to really continue unearthing our collective humanity. I often reflected on this new dynamic, how our lives, much like our comfort show, contained humor and depth, a balance that felt both comforting and exhilarating to explore. Every new guest we interviewed infused our conversations with fresh perspectives, spiraling us into meaningful discussions that bubbled with joy and authenticity. But more importantly, they served as gentle reminders of the quirks that make our stories uniquely ours. And then there came a day unlike any other, where our podcast reached a significant milestone, our 100th episode. It felt surreal, almost unreal, celebrating an anniversary where each part of our journey was woven through the echoes of laughter, inspiration, and healing. That night, as Jamie and I recorded, there was an electricity in the air, a blend of nervous energy and vibrant hope. I spoke a little deeper that time, relaying to our listeners how we began this journey amid uncertainties and doubts, drawing strength from the comfort show that had first inspired me to be braver than I felt. Sitting in that small recording room, surrounded by all the memories we had accumulated thus far, moments where we forged our friendship, advocated for one another, and crafted honest discussions that opened our hearts, I knew this was more than just a podcast. It was a living, breathing testament to the connections we forge when we step into the light of vulnerability. As I signed off that night, a comforting thought echoed in my mind: no matter what the next season holds, I have found my rhythm in this episodic journey called life, hand in hand with newfound friends echoing the lessons of our beloved characters. I drifted to sleep that night filled with a warm sense of purpose, ready for whatever came next, ready to embrace it all without fear, knowing that each chapter was merely a beautiful interplay of shared experiences and laughter, another episode in the vast melodrama of our imperfect existence. And this was simply the beginning. When I received the news that my older sister, Claire, had to move back in with our parents, something deep inside me told me that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fathom at the moment. I'm Emma, the youngest of three, and my relationship with Claire has always been a rocky one. Sure, we had shared laughter and tears growing up, but there was something about her larger-than-life persona that often overshadowed my quieter, more reserved disposition. I had built a life for myself, a snug little apartment in the heart of the city with a decent job that allowed me to pay my bills while still enjoying a few luxuries here and there. So when my parents called with concern edging their voices, explaining that Claire had been laid off and needed a place to stay temporarily, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They explained how Claire would contribute financially to the household, which seemed reasonable on the surface, but as the weeks passed, it became disappointingly clear that this was not going to be a temporary arrangement. The first indication of the shift came one afternoon when I casually visited my parents. Walking through the familiar doorway, I was immediately engulfed in a whirl of mismatched furniture and the uniquely cluttered chaos of their living room. It felt different now. Claire had rearranged the space, filling it with scattered boxes, remnants of her previous life. She greeted me with the same beaming smile, but I could sense an underlying tension, a whisper of irritation hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. We exchanged pleasantries that felt stilted and awkward, and it quickly became apparent that her presence was overshadowing mine. It didn't take long for her to bring up the topic of finances, how my parents were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments while trying to help her get back on her feet. It was a tough conversation that had me feeling cornered, like they expected me to take action. I found myself drowning in guilt, torn between helping my family and maintaining my own sense of independence. They mentioned how my contribution to the mortgage would ease their burdens and allow Claire more time to get a new job, framing it as a family obligation that I simply couldn't escape. After all, right? Family sticks together. The idea of throwing money their way felt like a no-brainer, but I couldn't help but wonder if Claire would truly be grateful or if she would instead see it as another opportunity to lean on me while I struggled to maintain my budding career. I mulled over it for days, and with each passing moment, the thought of participating in this financial strain more than I had anticipated grew heavier. It wasn't just my money at stake, it was my mental space, my comfort, and my sense of security that was being tested. As the weeks turned to months, the stress festered. A particularly low evening found me swirling through the darkness of my mind, battling with the anxiety of homeownership versus my sense of familial duty. Claire continued to thrive in the chaotic comfort of our parents' home, her laughter echoing through the walls while I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the distance grow. I pondered my worth in our family dynamic and felt torn between my urge to support them and my instinct to protect my own growing future. When confrontation finally loomed, it exploded into one dramatic night over a family dinner where we sat across the table, Claire alight with engaging stories from her day while I quietly picked at the cold pasta on my plate. In a moment of frustration, I voiced my feelings about not wanting to pay the mortgage. The air turned electric, and for the first time, Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of genuine indignation. "It's not just my responsibility," I asserted, a shaky confidence underlined by the crack in my voice. She was taken aback, and for a moment, I wondered if I had finally clarified my stance, but instead, all hell broke loose. I witnessed an explosion of accusations hurled between Claire and me, sharp words clattering like glass breaking. My parents, caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but I felt less like a daughter and more like a burden. Heat rose in my chest as Claire accused me of selfishness, while I voiced my feelings of unappreciation and betrayal. It was a raw, painful argument, and when it finally fizzled out, I couldn't shake off the suffocating realization that I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if I wanted to. I excused myself that night, feeling more isolated than ever, and upon returning to my apartment, I fell into a deep, restless sleep, punctuated with dreams of family betrayals and financial obligations that loomed over me like dark clouds. Days blended into weeks until I finally decided to distance myself from the toxic cycle of guilt and anger. I started to think critically about my own wants and needs. I drafted a letter to my parents, outlining my decision not to contribute to the mortgage, hoping it would provide clarity for all of us. It was written with a tense love, filled with the emotional depth of someone who desperately wanted to reconnect but felt trapped by the dynamic set years ago. I explained that I loved them all dearly, but I could no longer sacrifice my own stability for their peace. The letters found their way to my parents, and although the response wasn't immediately warm, my parents at least acknowledged my courage to stand my ground. Claire, however, took it harder than I expected. Her phone call that followed was rife with anger and misunderstanding, yet I felt something shift. Instead of clashing, I allowed her to express herself while I calmly responded, and to my surprise, her tone softened. Weeks turned to months. Though our relationship didn't magically mend, it did begin to evolve towards something more honest. Claire ultimately found a new job that stabilized her income, and while it took time, we began to rebuild the bridge our family needed. I learned that sometimes, a stand for myself did not stem from selfishness but from a place of deep self-respect. That unanticipated reflection taught me the art of balance, how love can coexist with boundaries. And while the discussion of finances still hung in the air like a specter, our family unit began to resonate with a different tone, a more supportive, understanding one. I shared this story with a friend as we laughed about the ridiculousness of our familial dynamics. And the strangest thing happened. Claire popped into my thoughts, reminding me that, sometimes, the way you navigate conflict can redefine relationships, even if it feels contentious at first. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of previous conflicts melted into the hush of my room, and I reveled in the soft glow of acceptance I felt. Maybe, in facing the storm together, we had each become stronger, more resilient. I would continue to carve my own path and embrace the complexity of love with boundaries, wrapped in the possibility of new beginnings and stronger ties. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, for a moment, but that moment helped safeguard my heart and nurture a family connection that was worth every ounce of struggle. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics at home shifted like the ebb and flow of the ocean tides, and I could feel the undertow of change swirling around me. My sister's presence had transformed the atmosphere. The house was no longer just a shell echoing with silent resentments and unspoken words but was now filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to take out the trash. I caught myself glancing at her when I thought she wasn't watching, noticing the way she'd laugh at her own silly jokes or how her eyes would shimmer when she spoke about her work. I felt a flicker of warmth, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to embrace in years. I wondered if this was the unfamiliar sound of healing, an orchestra assembling after decades of discordant notes, each of us tentatively racing our instruments to join the symphony. Yet, beneath this newly woven tapestry lay a knot of tension that refused to loosen. The impending reality of our parents' financial situation loomed over us like dark clouds on the horizon. They had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over our heads, sacrificing much for a sense of security that now seemed delicate. I couldn't shake off the guilt swirling in my gut, an insistent reminder that my own independence had inadvertently contributed to the distance growing between my family and our responsibilities. We were all learning to navigate these choppy waters together, bound by a shared sense of duty, but the question echoed in my mind, was I responsible for saving us from drowning? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in rich oranges and purples, I took a walk to gather my thoughts. I needed clarity. I found myself wandering to the coffee shop down the street, a cozy little place filled with the aroma of freshly brewed beans and the soft hum of conversations that somehow made my worries feel lighter. As I sipped my cappuccino, I overheard a couple discussing their struggles with family dynamics, and it struck me how universal our experiences were. That was when I realized I wasn't alone, that this shared pain, this negotiation of love and obligation, resonated beyond the walls of our family. When I returned home, a darkness was hanging in the air. My parents had decided to have the talk about their mortgage again. As they gathered us around the dining room table, I could see the worry etched into their faces, lines deepening like cracks in a porcelain vase, beautiful but fragile. They explained how the financial burden had grown heavier since my sister had moved in, how they had hoped the extra help would ease their situation, but instead it felt like an anchor dragging us all down. I could feel my heart racing, the old defenses rising up like walls starting to thicken around me again. I didn't want to fight, I wanted to connect, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. Finally, I spoke up, my voice steady but soft. What if we came together to plan this out? I want to help. The room fell silent, each of us in our thoughts, the tension a thick, almost tangible fog. My sister's eyes lit up, and for a moment, the lightness from the coffee shop danced back into the room. We frantically brainstormed ideas, pooling resources like a patchwork quilt, slowly stitching together something new. It was in that moment that I felt a compelling shift, a sturdy thread, woven through the fabric of our relationships, an undeniable connection that reminded us we were all part of the same tapestry. As the weeks passed, we fine-tuned our household budget, and while some days were harder than others, we managed to claw back the control that had slipped from our fingers. The burden didn't evaporate, but sharing it made it bearable. The night before my parents were set to meet with their mortgage lender, I found myself curled up with my sister on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us while we binge-watched our favorite show. The laughter flowed between us, and for the first time in so long, I felt free, unconfined by our past but tethered to something new and beautiful. When morning came, as the birds chirped their daily greetings, I caught an early glimpse of my parents, standing tall against the dawn, ready to face the day. They seemed more resolute, the worry less visible as they exchanged quiet words. I knew we had moved past the point of being the assholes. We hadn't just weathered the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain, to let the drops wash away our fears, and we emerged, messy, imperfect, but undeniably united. Looking back, I realized that my initial reluctance to pay the mortgage had stemmed from a place of self-preservation and misunderstanding, but it quietly evolved into an opportunity for growth. In acknowledging my boundaries, I learned the importance of balance and the strength of family, and that love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about sharing, supporting, and ultimately embracing the complex layers that knit us together. So, was I the asshole? Not anymore. Just a person learning to navigate the beautiful chaos of family ties, tangled yet stronger for the journey we shared. As for an update, life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. A couple of months later, my parents expressed their gratitude. Our collective efforts had eased their burden, and they even started discussing investments in their favorite hobbies again. My sister and I grew closer, sharing our lives, guiding one another, and at times, still butting heads. Yet, each argument only served as an avenue for growth, a chapter added to our story. I think, in the quiet moments of reflection, that's the beauty of family. It's messy, sometimes frustrating, but amidst all that chaos, we often find our way back to each other. And really, isn't that what matters most? As I settled into this new rhythm of life, I noticed how the air felt different in our home. It was lighter, infused with the sense of camaraderie that had blossomed between my sister and me. On weekends, our kitchen filled with the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces, an orchestra of sound as we attempted new recipes together. But it wasn't all flour and laughter, the undercurrents of tension could still surface. I remember one particularly rainy Saturday afternoon when the sky mirrored our mood. I had returned home after a long week of work, exhausted and craving solitude. Instead, I found my sister hosting an impromptu gathering of her friends. The din of youthful laughter and music pulsed through the house, and I felt my heart thrum uneasily in my chest. I was torn between the discomfort of intrusion and the warmth of familial support in their laughter, which echoed off the walls like constant reminders of choices I didn't quite understand. Concealed within the whirlwind of my thoughts was the nagging feeling that the strides we had made had somehow become entangled with my sister's demands. As the chaos of her life spilled into our shared space, I found myself feeling suffocated by the very familial bond I had craved. When I finally mustered the courage to address it, my sister, caught off guard, was defensive. You used to be so welcoming, she challenged, and I could sense the shadows of our past struggles creeping in. Inherently, this was a moment of vulnerability for both of us, and as the silence hung heavy before me, I realized it wasn't just about me needing space, it was also about her needing to assert her independence in this shared space. After what felt like an eternity of misunderstanding, we sat down, nursing cups of tea, the clamor of her friends fading into the background. I spoke my truth, gentle yet firm. I love having you here, but I need a little room to breathe sometimes. I watched as her expression softened, the realization dawning on her like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. I get it, she finally said, her voice laced with empathy. I'm still figuring this out too. From there, we laid the groundwork for a new kind of understanding, one that delicately balanced my need for tranquility with her vibrant, chaotic energy. We established times for her gatherings, leaving pockets of silence for both introspection and connection. As months slipped by like the autumn leaves falling gently from the trees outside, our family dynamic eased into a rhythm that felt right. With the festive season approaching, my parents decided to host a holiday dinner, hoping to gather everyone, both a celebration of the many transformations we had weathered and a nod to the community we had formed. We'd always traded off holidays with each other, but this year felt different. It pulsed with undercurrents of genuine appreciation. As the table filled with food and laughter, I observed the way my sister's friends mingled effortlessly with our family, an intertwined tapestry of relationships. Each conversation brought forth stories, inherited laughter, the kind born from shared histories and new experiences alike. But amidst the joy, I saw the familiar glint of tension creeping into the room as my parents expressed worry over their lingering mortgage, a detail I had hoped to keep under wraps. My sister, well-intentioned yet impulsive, enthusiastically shared ideas for a crowdfunding initiative to help with expenses. The way my parents' glimmers with confused hesitation only added weight to the conversation. I felt the room pulse with apprehension as layers of unspoken concern layered themselves upon my heart. Stepping in, I breathed deeply, drawing from the wisdom that had built itself over months of navigating rough waters together. Let's talk this through as a family, I suggested, knowing we could find common ground. We always had. The discussion that followed was cathartic and revealing, each family member presenting their views, fears woven seamlessly into a tapestry of resolution. Finally, we reached an understanding that eased all our hearts, an agreement to pool resources into a family fund that would alleviate some stress while allowing my parents to invest in their passions. It opened the door to a more significant discussion about finances, futures, and the shared desire to support one another. Sitting around that holiday table, the glows of fairy lights expertly littering the room flickered, mirroring the warmth in our hearts. I understood, in that moment, reassurance and growth can coexist, just as laughter and arguments can. Our journey had only begun to blossom, intricate and beautiful, revealing itself as we paid attention and cared for one another, an ever-evolving chapter filled with love. It was a moment of profound truth for me. Maybe, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, in navigating the messy underbelly of family life, we had built something sturdier than any foundation of separate lives. We had stitched a quilt of resilience, forever learning, forever growing, bound not by blood, but by our commitment to each other. I still remember the moment my life shifted when I was 15, the air thick with a mix of excitement and dread as I sat on my bed, my phone cradled in my hands. It felt like just another silly decision, one that all my friends were making, a way to feel grown up and wanted at an age when I struggled to understand what that even meant. I was never popular, not in the way that seemed to matter, but I had found a little corner of attention with someone who made me feel special. Alex was charming in a way that made him seem wise beyond his years, and when he began complimenting me, I felt like I was walking on air, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. I was excited yet scared. The weight of the secret I held seemed unbearable. I had told my best friend, Mia, hoping for something resembling reassurance, but she let out a soft gasp that made my chest tighten. "You sure you want to do that?" she asked quietly, her eyes wide. I shrugged, trying to dismiss her concerns but deep down wondering if I was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Then there was the night, the restless hours stretching endlessly until I finally succumbed to the impulsive thought that had gnawed at me for days. My heart raced as I positioned my phone, the soft glow of the screen lighting up the room, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The words on my screen felt heavy with meaning. I typed, hesitated, then clicked send, each second feeling like eternity. It turned out Alex was everything I thought he was but more, too. He was charming, but that charm concealed a genuinely toxic nature. The thrill of that connection quickly morphed into a sharp realization of the vulnerability I had exposed myself to. Within days, I lost my grip on a sense of safety that is naive in a world of sharp edges. The photos I had sent, intended to be a secret shared between two kids playing at adulthood, became fodder for a cruel game I never agreed to participate in when he decided to share them with his friends. I learned about it the hard way when I heard laughter echoing in the school hallways, each cruel giggle a dagger deep in my chest. They didn't call me by my name, I was simply that girl. The humiliation ballooned, each passing day a relentless storm of anxiety and shame that followed me home, invading every thought and every interaction. I'd lock myself in the bathroom, staring at the reflection of someone who felt like a stranger, questioning how I could have made such a grave error in judgment. The betrayal cut deeper than the ridicule, a twisted urge to make everyone understand that I was just a kid, lost in the whirlpool of teenage insecurities yet so desperate for validation. As the weeks faded into months, I became a ghost in my own life, a faceless figure drifting through a crowd that once felt like home. I wish I could say that I found a way to reclaim my narrative, that I could fight back and tell Alex exactly how he had wronged me, but silence was my only armor, a shield against the resurgence of hurt. Miraculously, things began to shift. I sought the unwavering comfort from Mia. She gently held my hand through the worst of it, her support a reminder that there were still people who saw me as I was and not as a caricature of someone's cruelty. The heart-wrenching experience drew some of my former friends closer while severing ties with daylight friendships that had dulled in their sincerity. Through Mia and other steadfast souls, I found resilience, learned how to vocalize my hurt, and little by little, the bravery burrowed deep within me began to bloom outwardly. It was easy to lose sight of myself in the cacophony of whispers, but I recollected the fragments of my identity, and it became apparent, my worth was no longer tied to someone else's decisions. When I finally got the courage to confront Alex months later, there was an unexpected calmness in my heart. I walked up to him, ready to finally speak what had knotted in my throat for so long. I told him how he had diminished my world, how I had trusted him and how he betrayed that trust in the most irrevocable way. What I expected, perhaps, was a reaction, anger or dismissal or maybe even a hint of remorse. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Why did you even care? It was just a picture." Those words cut deeper than anything. It solidified for me that he was consumed by his own ego, blind to the pain he caused. In contrast, I experienced the bittersweet release of standing firm, of confronting my past, and ultimately letting go. It was there and then that I understood, through those harrowing months, I had learned for myself what real strength looked like. Looking back now, as an adult, I find myself grappling with that scarred chapter of my youth, considering it a cautionary tale rather than a source of shame. I began to share my story in platforms where others might find a reflection of healing in it. I created a small forum where young people could talk about the pressures they face, harnessing pain to build resilience and community. Updates often come flooding in from those who once bore the weight of similar burdens, each message a reminder that while the past can be a formidable beast, it also has the power to bind us together in our shared experiences. In a way, it fostered a sense of empathy that had me see each person, not as a label, but as a complex collection of tales worth telling. Through that transformation, I discovered my own redemption. Instead of regret, there sprouted a kind of understanding, a luminous thread of human connection that binds us all, making us stronger. As I continued to careen through this labyrinth of shared stories and revelations, a little flame began to flicker within me, fueled by the connections I was forming. Each confession I read mirrored pieces of my own experience, and I started to see my younger self not as an embarrassment or a foolish girl lost in a world she didn't fully understand, but as a part of the universal human journey. I wasn't alone. Countless others had danced with the specter of anxiety and regret, had fumbled their way through adolescence like it was a minefield. I realized then that mistakes were not the end of the world but, rather, the very stepping stones that shaped us into who we were meant to be. As I navigated through the myriad of responses to my post, an unexpected message caught my eye. It was from a user, Phoenix Reborn 23, who expressed a particularly profound understanding of my situation. They too had sent explicit photos at a young age, only to find themselves grappling with not just the consequences of that decision but the enduring impact it had on their self-worth and relationships. They shared how, from that experience, they had channeled their pain into advocating for digital literacy among teens, working to help others understand the permanence of their digital footprints. Inspired, I found myself contemplating the idea of utilizing my story as a catalyst for change. Maybe, just maybe, I could transform my reflection into a lesson for others, a way of opening up dialogue and fostering understanding among young people who might navigate similar paths. The longer I pondered this new perspective, the more clarity washed over me, as if I was emerging from a fog that had long shrouded my thoughts. It was a quiet yet powerful realization. I could indeed choose to own my past without letting it define me. In that spirit, I decided to draft a blog post, recounting my experiences while threading in messages of hope, caution, and resilience. I wanted to share how vulnerability doesn't have to be shameful but can be a source of strength when used wisely. As I typed away one evening, anxiety prickled at my spine, but I pressed on, my heart racing with determination. Finally, after countless revisions and heartfelt reflections, I clicked publish. The responses poured in, brimming with appreciation and encouragement. It felt like some unseen chains were dismantling with each word I shared, liberating me from the shadows that had lingered over my youth. This newfound journey became about transformation, not destruction, and with each interaction, I felt that flame within me grow stronger. Months passed, and while my past never quite faded from my mind, it transformed into a reminder that my narrative was not one of isolation but of resilience. I continued to connect with others, exchanging stories of survival and strength, and seeing how they bore their own scars with grace. As I ventured into this new chapter of my life, I discovered that sharing my truths didn't just heal me, but it helped others to heal as well. Together, we forged an unspoken pact. It was okay to be imperfect, and in our collective vulnerability lay the seeds of hope, waiting to blossom into understanding. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, I received a message from Phoenix Reborn 23 again. This time, they had organized a small local meetup focused on sharing personal stories related to social media and its impact on young lives. They invited me to speak, to share not just about my past but about the redemption I had found. Nervous yet exhilarated, I accepted the invitation. Standing in front of that crowd, surrounded by eager faces, I recalled the girl I had once been, the girl who found herself lost in digital shadows. But as I opened my mouth to speak, the weight of that moment turned into wings, lifting me as I shared my story. The room listened intently, and as I recounted the painful lessons, I could see understanding spread amongst them like warm sunshine. In that instant, I didn't just see hopeful futures glimmering before them, I saw the threads of connection that had been woven through vulnerability, reminding us all that our pasts might hold burdens, but they also hold the shimmering possibility of growth and reconnection. And as I stepped down from the stage, the applause enveloped me, not just in approval but in acceptance of my journey, and I smiled, knowing that I had triumphed not only over my regrets but also over the darkness that once overshadowed my youth. As I left the stage, a strange calm washed over me, so different from the turmoil that had once lived in my heart. The bright lights and the thundering applause faded into a comfortable haze as I stepped backstage, where shadows mingled with muted colors and the expressions of fellow participants mirrored the kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within me. I was enveloped in a blend of nervous energy and newfound clarity, heralding a moment of connection that not long ago had felt impossible. A young woman with piercing blue eyes approached me. She was about my age, perhaps a year or two older, her face etched with lines of concern that spoke volumes. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your story reminded me that I'm not alone in this." I felt a rush of warmth at her words. I had managed to reach out and touch someone else's pain through my own confession. The conversations that followed were like droplets of rain nourishing parched ground. Each person shared their stories, their regrets, and together we were creating a tapestry of shared experience, passing strength from one to another like a warm embrace. There was Marcus, who had foolishly lashed out online, only to find out years later that those impulsive words had deeply scarred another. He spoke of his journey toward understanding that our digital footprints leave imprints on souls, not just on screens. Then there was Sarah, who had experienced betrayal by a close friend when she shared private messages. She bore her shame openly, wielding it as a gift-like armor that now shielded her from future heartaches while also allowing her to empathize with those who falter. With every confession, I wrote these moments in my heart, storing them away like precious trinkets that shimmered with potential healing. I finally found a moment of solitude, stepping outside into the crisp evening air that enveloped me like a soothing balm. The night sky twinkled overhead, stars spread like scattered thoughts across an expansive canvas, whispering promises of endless possibilities. I closed my eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over me, feeling both a sense of closure and the stirrings of a new beginning. Somewhere down that path, I hope to build a charity aimed at helping young people navigate their struggles with self-image and impulsive decisions, to hold workshops that foster candid, open dialogues. But first, I needed to process this experience, to allow its lessons to settle deep within my bones. I picked up my phone and started to type a post for that very community that had cradled my vulnerable heart. "Let me share an unexpected awakening," I wrote, pouring out the details of the evening. I felt the gentle flow of motivation guiding me, the urge to reach out and uplift others crowding every corner of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and my original post, a simple confession of regret, had blossomed into something greater. The supportive comments poured in, each one carefully weaving a new strand into our collective story. People began to share their own moments of vulnerability, conversations sparked around family, friendships, and our digital existences. I responded to each, imparting little nuggets of wisdom, interlacing my experiences with theirs, and the ripple effects were profound. Months later, when I finally launched my nonprofit organization, I stood on the stage once more. The auditorium was filled with young faces, worried yet eager. It was during that opening speech that I realized my journey had transformed. I was no longer merely a storyteller sharing cobwebbed regret. Instead, I was a fellow traveler guiding others toward understanding, the notion that while darkness can often cloud our paths, it is also the very essence of our shared humanity that lights our way. With shared laughter and the audible exhalation of those who had felt the weight of judgment, that day became a celebration of resilience, for every timid youth sitting in the audience represented a life ready to reclaim their narrative, just like I had done. And as I concluded my speech, I felt the tether that united us all, a bond kindled by simple, honest confessions, softening the sharp edges of our histories while propelling us toward luminous futures brimming with possibility and hope. Confession: I paid my way through college coursework, and now I'm going to graduate with a degree that I did not earn, but rather bought piece by piece. I know how it sounds, flippant, irresponsible, but let me explain before you judge. It all began in my sophomore year when the pressure of maintaining my scholarships while balancing a part-time job became almost unbearable. I was overwhelmed, drowning in courses that felt designed to torment rather than educate. My friends were either excelling effortlessly or struggling gloriously, and I found myself in a dark space of melancholy detachment. One evening, after a particularly intense round of studying that included multiple energy drinks and little sleep, I stumbled upon an online community that offered a service, purchasing coursework and final exams outright. The first transaction felt like a slippery slope, the kind that promises a temporary fix for long-term consequences. Justifying that act of desperation became easy. After all, wouldn't I be earning the degree by paying towards my future? I convinced myself that everyone was cheating in one form or another, they just didn't have the boldness to embrace it quite like I did. As each semester passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a quicksand of deception, carefully crafting excuses for my absence from study sessions and over-exaggerating my partial understanding of the subjects. My friends often praised me for my dedicated work ethic, and although their words would sting momentarily with guilt, I brushed them aside, whispering to myself that I was only finding a shortcut to a frustrating destination. But there lay the essence of my conflict. There were moments, late at night, when the weight of my choices pressed down like a seal, prompting haunting questions. Was I a fraud? Would I deserve to step on the stage come graduation? I could already hear my family cheering, my mother's proud smile lighting up the auditorium, unaware of the disingenuous piece of paper I was holding onto so tightly. Everything kept shifting and fracturing within me like glass breaking silently in a forgotten corner, beautiful yet destructive. As graduation approached, the ache of my concealment gnawed beneath my skin. I was a ticking time bomb, a secret kept far too long, and it felt like the walls were closing in, threatening to expose me at any moment. Then, one day while lurching through the cafeteria, a friend pulled me aside. She had suspected something was amiss, and the look on her face struck a match to my carefully constructed facade. Confessing to her felt like actually letting the air out of a balloon. Her response was one I hadn't anticipated. Rather than anger, she offered empathy, admitting that the academic landscape often forced students into corners they had to navigate through dodgy strategies like mine. That moment shifted everything for me. It wasn't about whether what I had done was right or wrong, but rather about understanding the depth of the pressure we all faced. As graduation day arrived, I stood among my fellow students, donning my cap and gown, feeling simultaneously high on adrenaline and low with self-doubt. And when my name was called, I felt something shatter in me, the part that thought I could outsmart the world. I walked across that stage, a degree in hand, yes, one bought with a hefty price tag rather than blood, sweat, and tears. The applause echoed around me like distant thunder, and in that moment, I realized I had betrayed my journey, but as I met my family's expectations, the simple joy of their pride began to override the complexity of my feelings. Afterward, I stepped outside, almost dazed by the weightiness of it all, when a thought flared to life in my mind. This was just the beginning. I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth forever. It was time for some honesty. Perhaps I would share my clandestine story in a more private setting, with those who really mattered, and in that telling, I would find healing. I couldn't change the past, but I could redefine my future. Maybe my experience would even serve as a lesson on authenticity, connection, and the very real pressures of society. Update: several months later, I did reach out to my friend who had supported me back at graduation, along with a few close acquaintances. Over coffee, I laid everything bare, and to my surprise, they responded not with judgment but rather with understanding. It sparked conversations about our experiences and the struggles many face in our generation regarding societal expectations and the pressure to succeed at any cost. Writing this out, sharing my truth, it felt liberating, and together we began to create a group focusing on academic honesty and support, helping others navigate their own paths with integrity. Now, as I look toward the future, I hold my degree not just as a symbol of achievement, but as a reminder that it's not always the path we take that defines us, but the honesty we must eventually embrace along the way. I can still visualize that summer afternoon when my friends and I held our first meeting. Inside the small campus coffee shop, sunlight poured in through the big windows, illuminating our makeshift meeting space, which consisted of mismatched chairs and tables pushed together. The aroma of roasted beans filled the air, creating a sense of warmth, much like the conversations we began to share. In one corner, I could see Sarah, nervously twirling her hair, finally breaking her silence to share her own struggles, how she felt the weight of her family's expectations resting heavily on her shoulders. It was a familiar feeling. I had been there, too, buried under pressure and guilt, trying to juggle classes, a part-time job, and an insatiable desire to please everyone around me. Our little group blossomed into a safe haven, where confessions were freely exchanged like whispers of wind passing through the trees. Before long, we were venturing beyond just our academic honesty initiative. We organized events that fostered a sense of community, bringing together individuals who felt overwhelmed and out of place in the finicky world of higher education. We laughed more than I ever thought possible, exchanging stories of late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and the ridiculousness of your classic imposter syndrome. There was something profound about vulnerability. When you openly admit your flaws and fears to others, it transforms those burdens into shared experiences, which somehow lightens the load. I started attending workshops on ethics and academic integrity, learning more about the real impact of decisions I used to brush aside. There was a powerful moment during one of those discussions when I finally understood the gravity of my actions. I stood there, listening to another student practically in tears, talking about how he felt he was not worthy of being in college because he struggled to keep up, how he had resorted to cheating just to stay afloat. I felt guilty, a wave of remorse washing over me, and I wondered how many people like him had slipped through the cracks, feeling alone in their academic journey. It prompted me to speak openly about my own choices, to share the truth that had slowly unraveled my conscience. As I spoke, I saw the surprise mingled with relief in the eyes of those around me. It was as if I had peeled back the layers of shame that had wrapped tightly around us all. This cathartic release sparked discussions about what it truly means to earn your education and how, at the heart of it, is the understanding that everyone is fighting their own battles in silence. The irony was not lost on me. While I had paid my way through college, the real education came from facing my fears and flaws head-on. As the semester drew to a close, I prepared for graduation, standing in front of the mirror, my cap and gown draping elegantly over the shoulders of someone who had finally found a measure of peace. My heart, once heavy with deceit, was now lightened by compassion and understanding, not just for myself, but for the countless faces I had come to know and love through our group. As I received my diploma, I didn't just see the degree. Instead, I perceived it as a token of survival, a reminder of how far I've come. In that moment, it was evident that integrity mattered far more than mere achievements on paper. I left the auditorium, my heart buoyant, my soul ready to forge a new path, one constructed on the foundation of honesty and camaraderie. I was stepping into the world, prepared not just to be a graduate but to advocate for others, to encourage them that honesty isn't just a buzzword but a guiding principle. And under the stars that night, sharing laughter with friends who had become family, I felt a profound sense of belonging, a richness of experience that far surpassed any degree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I embraced the knowledge that while I may have struggled, I was now equipped with the tools to help others navigate their own intricate labyrinths. Reflecting back, I realized that my so-called failure became my greatest privilege, an opportunity to redefine success on my own terms and perhaps sow the seeds of authenticity in the lives of others around me. With that warm feeling of belonging wrapping around me like a blanket, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I've come. The journey from a hollow accomplishment to a deeply personal understanding of integrity had changed the contours of my life in ways I had never anticipated. As the conversation turned to lighter topics and our laughter echoed into the night, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. This was more than just a graduation party, it was a celebration of truth and acceptance. There's something about being on the brink of a new chapter that fills you with excitement, yet also with a slight twinge of anxiety. Yes, I was graduating, but this meant stepping into a world outside the university's protective walls, where the complexities of adulthood would lay themselves bare. That summer, my friends and I busied ourselves with dreams and practicalities, each of us contemplating what lay ahead. I found solace in writing, each word pouring onto the page as a cathartic release. I chronicled my experiences, not just out of a desire to express myself, but with the hope of crafting a guide that could resonate with others who faced similar dilemmas, the pressure to succeed, the fears of inadequacy, and the daunting shadows of society's expectations. I spent evenings sipping coffee in cozy cafes, hazy lamplight illuminating the pages of my journal as I poured my thoughts onto paper, detailing not just my journey but also the voices of fellow students I had spoken with about their own struggles. In doing so, I connected with those who had grappled with cheating, anxiety, or the fear of disappointing their families. It was through these candid stories that I started to see a pattern. Many of us felt lost in a sea of comparison, our worth often tethered to numerical grades and hollow accolades. I realized that my own story had the potential to shed light on the darker corners of academic life that weren't often highlighted. Instead of seeking validation through a conventional path, I began to embrace the idea that each one of us has our own unique narrative that adds depth to the collective experience. As the season turned, and graduation approached, I stood at the threshold of not just a ceremony but a pivotal moment of self-discovery. With my friends rallying around me, we decided to establish a real space on campus for honest dialogue, an initiative to create a safe haven for students struggling with the weight of unreal expectations. We entitled it Unwritten Paths, a name that encapsulated the myriad ways we could navigate life with integrity, well-being, and authenticity. Each week, students would gather to share their stories, brainstorm ideas, and offer support, knowing that they were part of a community that championed personal truths over societal pressures. Finally, graduation day arrived, a technicolor whirlwind of pride, nerves, and overwhelming emotion. Standing in line, clad in my cap and gown, I felt every heartbeat echoing my anticipation. When they called my name, I stepped forward, my friends cheering wildly from the sidelines. As I held the diploma in my hands, I wasn't just thinking about the hours of study, the sleepless nights, or the money spent. Instead, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the lessons learned along the way. Those lessons had come not just from textbooks and lectures but from grappling with my sincerity and, in turn, learning to embrace the authenticity of others. As I scanned the crowd, I found my closest friends, people who understood me, who celebrated me not for my grades, but for my journey, and my heart swelled with joy. We gathered later, recounting the day's events, our laughter bright against the evening sky. In that moment, I recognized something profound. While the future felt as uncharted as a blank page, I was ready to tackle it with an open heart, armed with empathy and resilience. And then, as if life had its own script, I received a message from my old college professor, the one who had challenged me to think beyond the traditional definitions of success. He invited me to share my journey and the impact of our community initiative at an upcoming panel on academic integrity. Nervously, I accepted. It felt surreal to think that my story could inspire a broader conversation. As I prepared to step into a space surrounded by academics and thought leaders, I took a moment to breathe and center myself, reflecting on the days of fear and self-doubt, knowing full well that I was embarking on yet another chapter, one where I could truly weave my experiences into a narrative that might change someone's life for the better. In sharing my voice, in being open about my flaws and triumphs, I was no longer just someone who paid her way through college. I was a living testament to the power of transformation, honesty, and compassion. With every word I spoke, I hoped to inspire others not to hide behind their carefully constructed facades but to embrace their journeys, however messy or unconventional they might be. As I continued to navigate my path in this dynamic world, I realized that the degree I hadn't truly earned was merely a stepping stone towards something far more significant, a shared vision for a future where integrity and authenticity reigned supreme. There's a saying that suggests the things we buy can sometimes end up owning us, and for years, I was a prime example of that paradox, particularly when it came to the most extravagant and frankly ludicrous purchase of my life, a rare collector's edition of a board game. I still remember the day it happened, sitting on my cramped living room couch as I scrolled through an online auction website in search of something entirely mundane, a gift for my younger brother's birthday. I stumbled across an ad for a pristine, complete version of an obscure game from my childhood, the kind that had long since disappeared from shelves, and I could already smell the nostalgic fumes wafting from that box. The board, so vividly illustrated, beckoned me to dive back into a simpler time, and before I could question my judgment, I placed a bid that spiraled far beyond what I had ever intended to spend. It was a heady rush, fueled by memories of sticky summer afternoons and the laughter of friends crowded around a dining room table, yet I virtually locked myself into a cycle of self-deception, convincing myself that this $1,500 piece of cardboard and plastic would unlock not just a trip to the past, but a way to reconnect with my estranged brother, whom I hadn't seen in years due to a falling out that seemed insurmountable at the time. When the package finally arrived, I was overcome with excitement, but that high quickly dissipated as I realized I didn't know how to bridge the chasm that had formed between us since our father's passing. Still, I forced my hand and decided a game night was in order, diligently calling him and inviting him over, convinced the game was a magical portal through which we could rekindle the connection we had lost. To my surprise, he agreed. The evening unfolded with a mix of awkward silences and forced laughter as we set up the game, the pristine board lying before us like a relic of bygone days. As we began, I could see the memories flickering behind his eyes, but apprehension crept in when I realized he was less interested in the game and more in rekindling our deeper conversation, the one I had been frantically avoiding. The joy the game had promised quickly turned hollow, and soon we were disengaged, our minds elsewhere, but as the hours passed, something unexpectedly changed. During play, the childhood banter started to creep back in, the laughter became more genuine, the stress eased, and I found myself realizing that we were no longer just brothers caught in a messy past, but two people longing for a deeper connection. The game didn't mend everything, but it broke the ice, creating a fragile space for us to talk about our shared grief and the seemingly insurmountable rift it had carved in our relationship. By the end of the night, I could see the faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. We didn't leave as best friends, but we had started taking steps back toward being brothers. Reflecting back on that evening, I couldn't help but feel that the board game had been an immense waste of money in many ways, a fleeting attempt to buy back the love I felt I had lost, but maybe, just maybe, it had been worth every penny for the door it opened to something deeper. Fast forward a few months later, we still hadn't fully repaired the damage, there was still a lot of ground to cover, but we were texting more and even planning another game night. And as for the game itself, it now proudly sits on the shelf as a reminder that sometimes the things we think are just wasteful expenses can turn into the most treasured experiences, and perhaps, the biggest waste wasn't the money spent but the years we let slip by before we faced our fears and reached out. So, in a way, that overpriced collector's edition had much more value than I originally perceived, serving not as an anchor, but as the bridge leading back to my brother, a lesson learned in the most unexpected of ways, and one I carry with me every day. As I look at the collector's edition and the joy it sparked, I can't help but reflect on how much I had overlooked in life before that moment. The gamer's console sits nestled next to dusty board games and old comic books, remnants of childhood joys, waiting to be revisited. At first, I thought my nostalgia was merely a longing for the good old days, an escapism from my daily grind as a marketing coordinator for a tech company that often felt more like a cage than a career. I buried myself in work, burying feelings of disconnection, particularly with Ben, my older brother. He was always there during those carefree days, his laughter echoing through the halls of our small childhood home, two boys sharing dreams over pixelated landscapes and stories of heroism. Somewhere along the way, life had swept us into its chaotic current, and our once vibrant bond began to dull. The whole scenario ignited a fire in me. The moment I popped the disc into my console, trepidation tinged with excitement buzzed through me. I thumbed through the instructions, which curiously reopened shadows and memories of our gaming marathons, how we'd huddled on the couch, every victory celebrated with cheers, every defeat met with contagious laughter. In a fit of impulse, I sent Ben a simple text, "Hey, remember that game we loved as kids?" I got it. The silence that followed felt interminable, yet with every passing hour, the anticipation transformed into anxiety. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want to reminisce about forgotten afternoons spent battling through virtual worlds? It was a cloudy Sunday when my phone vibrated with a response. To my surprise, it was hesitant and filled with nostalgia. "Yeah, I remember. I'd love to come over and play sometime." My heart raced at the thought of reconnecting. Preparations began, a simple cleaning of my apartment and a trip to the store for snacks. The weight of my apprehension lessened, perhaps because I knew I wasn't just preparing for a game, I was preparing for a reunion, a chance to bridge the gaps we had both let widen. The day arrived, clouds giving way to the soft glow of an autumn sun. When Ben finally stepped through my door, the air felt thick with anticipation. He looked a bit older, the kind of age that comes with grown-up responsibilities, but his grin was the same. It was a little awkward at first, small talk peppered with quiet memories, but then, as the game loaded and our avatars appeared on the screen, laughter began to pour out as easily as it had all those years ago. The screen reflected not just our characters, but the brothers we used to be, fearless and united against any challenge. Time melted away as we navigated the game's world, reliving old strategies and sharing stories from our lives, each tale reconnecting pieces of our diverged paths. The more we played, the lighter the conversation became, peeling back layers of hurt, disappointment, and misunderstandings that lingered between us like an unspoken truce. I could feel my heart swell as nostalgia danced in the air, wonder replacing the sorrow of neglected years. In that moment, no overpriced game could feel like a waste, it had become the undeniable catalyst for healing. And with every level we conquered together, we also conquered the past, transforming it from a burden into a shared journey, something to be appreciated rather than regretted. When we finally stepped away from the screen, it was dark outside, the only light coming from the moon hanging silently above us. I could sense a change in Ben, a weight lifted that he didn't even know he was carrying. We sat side by side, finishing off the last of the snacks, our earlier inhibitions gone, our laughter echoing in the cozy silence. In the days and weeks that followed, our Wednesday night gaming sessions became something we both looked forward to, a rekindled tradition. Each week, we navigated through new worlds and battled countless foes, each session solidifying our connection further. I realized, in those quiet moments of gaming and sharing, that it wasn't just about escapism. It was about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable again, to open doors we thought were forever shut. Ben and I began to share more about life, our struggles at work, relationships, and the hopes we had for the future, the laughter transforming into heartfelt conversations we had long neglected. As I now sit here recalling all of this, I recognize it wasn't just the game that was overpriced, but the years we let slip by in silence. Yet how beautifully ironic it was that a seemingly trivial purchase had sparked the most precious gift. It had led us back to each other. The lesson, indeed, was invaluable, a reminder that sometimes, in the chase of adulthood, we forget to invest in the relationships that matter most. So here I am, the collector's edition game now more than just a forgotten relic, it's a bridge to shared moments, a reminder of how time can be reclaimed. As I hit the lights and settle down for sleep, I can't help but smile, feeling grateful for what once seemed like a waste of money transformed into a treasured investment in love and laughter. And perhaps it's appropriate that I leave this story, not in solitude but with a broader message. Sometimes it takes a little push, a reminder, a ridiculous purchase, to face our fears, reconnect, and revive the bonds that make life worth living. Update, just yesterday, Ben texted me, a simple message that brimming with excitement. Guess what? I found an old console in the attic. Let's have a retro game night next week. And as I felt the flutter of anticipation spark again, I couldn't help but think, sometimes, it's the simplest of things that remind us of the biggest joys, often hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. As I sat on my couch, my phone still warm from the recent text, I couldn't shake the anticipation swirling in my chest. Ben, my brother, and I had spent countless hours lost in the worlds of chunky pixels and vibrant retro soundtracks, our laughter echoing through the living room as we battled pixelated monsters and solved puzzles together. Those golden days slipped away, buried beneath the weight of life's demands and the silence that had stretched between us over the years, a silence that seemed to expand the longer we avoided acknowledging it. But now, with his simple invitation, a door to the past nudged open, and I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. I could almost hear our old melodies, the triumphant victory music from that one game that had always been our favorite, the soundtrack of childhood. It beckoned me, coaxing me out of my present worries and back into those carefree moments where nothing else mattered but the next level. The week leading up to our retro game night felt almost surreal. I scoured online marketplaces for vintage snacks to recreate that nostalgic atmosphere, the cheesy puffs and sticky sweet sodas we used to consume in careless abandon. With each item I ordered, I felt like I was piecing together a time capsule, a small celebration of all we had, and all we almost lost. Occasionally, I would replay our last encounter in my mind, the unspoken words hanging in the air laden with years of unshed tears and frustrations. I could hear my own thoughts, criticizing myself for letting so much time slip away even as I felt the tight-knit fabric of our bond beginning to mend, one thread at a time. Finally, the day of the game night arrived. I prepared the living room like a scene out of one of those cheesy romantic films, couch cushions tossed aside, the old console hooked up to the TV, and munchies laid out in carefully curated chaos, just like the good old days. When Ben showed up, a slight nervousness tugged at my stomach. What if the years had changed him? What if awkward silence replaced the laughter? He walked in, his eyes darting around as they landed on the setup. "You went all out, didn't you?" Ben laughed, a sound I had missed so dearly, and just like that, the tension eased. As we sat down on the floor, surrounded by the familiar scent of cheesy snacks and the glow of the screen, I felt the years peel away. We started with a game, and I watched as he instinctively placed his hands on the controller, a glint of competitive desire sparking in his eyes. I remembered this. I remembered him. We fell into a rhythm, laughter bubbling up freely as we shared stories about our lives, his exciting new city adventures and my mundane workdays, but what mattered was our willingness to share once again. I could feel the crack forming in the wall we'd built, our words smoothing the edges of misunderstandings long past. "Do you remember?" he would ask, his voice trailing off like a nostalgic melody, and I'd smile, reminding him of the time we lost our save file on a particularly hard level and how we wept for hours over pixelated losses. Hours passed as the night slipped away, each round blurring into the next, our collective laughter filling the air like music, enchanting and bittersweet. Shadows lengthened as we explored past worlds long forgotten, but every level we conquered felt like not just a nostalgic journey of pixels but the beginnings of a new era for us. At one point, I looked over at Ben as we both burst into laughter over an inside joke from a long-lost game. It brought tears of joy to my eyes. I realized that the biggest waste was never the money spent on that collector's edition. It was the regret of lost time, the bitter reality of so many moments I thought were too late to reclaim. As we finally put the games away, I felt a surge of gratitude crash over me. Ben flopped back onto the couch, his head tilted back while a blissful smile lingered on his face. "We should do this more often," he said, and it struck me as both a suggestion and a promise. I nodded, feeling the warmth of connection wrap around us, knowing that we'd let this night become a new chapter, the kind I had almost forfeited through years of silence and distraction. I finally understood the true value behind that wasteful purchase. It wasn't the game but what it led us to, the reclaiming of time, the rediscovering of bonds. "How about we make a plan for every month?" I suggested, my heart racing at the prospect of future adventures and memories waiting to be forged. The conversation flowed seamlessly from there, possibilities unfolding like a blooming flower. And as I got up to grab more snacks, the sound of his laughter still echoing in my ears, I felt light and optimistic, a grounded sign that the burdens of the past would not define us. Sometimes, it turns out, in the most unexpected corners of our lives, we find threads of connection waiting to be woven anew, just waiting for us to take a leap and reach out, echoing the broader message that life should be lived, explored, and above all, shared with those we love. Update: since that magical night, Ben and I have instated a regular gaming evening, retro games, new releases, and even board games to shake things up. With every session, we laugh louder and talk deeper, and on a whim, last month, we even invited some old friends to join us. Suddenly our humble living room felt like a reunion of sorts. I often think how that one impulsive purchase opened the floodgates of joy, helping us reclaim not just our relationship but the essence of what it means to share moments together. Sometimes, the things we dread, the conversations we put off, can become the brightest chapters in a story we're still writing. And while we've had our challenges, I know one truth for certain: it's never too late to start anew, one game, one laugh, one memory at a time. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself seated on a park bench, the sun dipping low and casting golden hues over the trees, lost in thought as I waited for my friend Sarah. We had grown up together, our lives entwined in a winding road of shared memories, laughter, and even occasional disagreements. One of those disagreements surfaced less than a week ago when Sarah casually mentioned she had rehomed her cat, Luna, because she was moving into a new apartment that didn't allow pets. I remember how my stomach churned at those words, the implications weighing heavy as I fought against the instinct to defend the word or home, a term that felt cold and clinical in this context. To me, it signified a relinquishment of responsibility, a decision that felt too easy for someone who had adored their pet just weeks before. When she arrived, enthusiasm radiated from her as she spoke about her new place, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had to say something. "Did you really have to rehome her?" I asked, my voice teetering between concern and accusation. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes flicked away, a flicker of guilt dancing on her features. "Well, I didn't have a choice," she replied defensively, her fingers tracing the fabric of her jacket. It felt like an innocent conversation spiraling into something deeper, an unspoken battle of values. As she continued detailing the space in her new apartment, excitement spilling from her like the leaves falling around us, I wrestled with the weight of my words. Was I being harsh? Was it fair to confront her at that moment, when all she wanted was to share her joy? I could see Luna's big, curious eyes, the way she would curl up in my lap when I visited Sarah, and it just felt wrong. "You could have found someone who could take care of her properly," I said, my voice steadier now, watching for Sarah's response. There was a long silence. Her expression closed off, and for the first time, I felt the distance between us. "You don't get it, do you?" she finally said, a hint of anger creeping into her tone. "I loved her, but I couldn't keep her. I had to think about my life. You know how it is when you're on your own." That was it, my heartbeat pulsed loud in my ears as I processed her admission, my mind rushing through memories of late-night snack raids indulging in comfort food, the unshakable bond that had once brought us close. I was the anchor, and she had seemed so adrift. I wanted the best for her, but at that moment, I felt like I had done the unthinkable. We were friends, yet I had challenged a decision that cut deeper than I realized. After that evening, our communications chilled. She began to post pictures of her new apartment, filled with stylish decor and vibrant colors, each post a reminder of how our lives were heading in different directions. I longed to reach out, to mend the bridge I had burned with my misplaced need to correct. A few weeks later, I decided to invite her over. For coffee. As I poured and we settled into the familiar comfort of my living room, I took a leap. "I'm sorry for how I reacted. It wasn't my place to judge your decisions. I was scared of losing our friendship," she sighed, her defenses lowering. "I didn't mean to shut you out. It just hurt to hear it from you." There was a catharsis in admitting our faults, a moment where we synchronized our emotions, realizing the importance of honesty. As we talked it through, we both learned the value of understanding versus judgment. Maybe I wasn't the asshole, but just a friend trying to navigate a complex emotional landscape. I remember leaving the conversation feeling lighter, wrapped in a new layer of connection with Sarah, imperfect yet honest. In our journey to find common ground, we had stitched together a stronger bond, one that could withstand the challenges of life, including the heartbreak of saying goodbye to a pet. And as autumn slipped into winter, I reflected on how it was all right to feel deeply, to weigh decisions heavily, even when it caused ripples in our relationships. It's not about being right or wrong. Sometimes, it's simply about learning to listen. Update: a few months later, Sarah reached out, asking if I could join her for a fundraiser at the local animal shelter. Passion gleamed in her eyes as she spoke about the importance of responsible pet ownership and the struggles of animals in need. "I think it's time I helped make a difference in some way," she said. In that moment, I knew Sarah had turned her experience into motivation, reshaping her heartache into advocacy. As we teamed up to raise awareness together, that initial tension, that moment of conflict, became a stepping stone into something greater, a testament to the resilience of friendship wrapped in understanding and growth. We started planning the fundraiser with a sense of purpose that I hadn't expected. As the days passed, I found myself leaning into this project with all the energy I had, eager to support Sarah in her newfound mission. The community pulled together in a way that was almost magical. Local businesses donated food, prizes, and even some services for the event. It was amazing to see people rally around something so meaningful. The shelter, a small yet bustling space filled with the soulful mews and barks of its inhabitants, became a second home to both Sarah and me. We spent hours making flyers, organizing online donations, and promoting the event on social media. With each post and share, I noticed Sarah's spirits rising significantly. She had transformed from a person who felt the heaviness of her previous decision into a beacon of light for others who were struggling with similar choices. The night before the fundraiser, we sat on the floor of my living room, strewn with papers, colorful decorations, and half-empty takeout containers. The air was alive with excitement, and I couldn't shake the feeling of how much this experience had brought us closer. As we laughed and shared stories about the cats we both cherished and the oddities we had come across at the shelter, I felt a sense of peace settle over us. The weight of that initial argument slowly faded, replaced by shared laughter and dreams of making a real difference. We had both learned from the experience. I was grateful for the way she had opened up about her choices, and she was hopeful about helping others avoid similar pitfalls. The day of the fundraiser dawned bright and sunny, a perfect backdrop for our event. People arrived with smiles, families brought their children, and a few furry friends bounced alongside them. I could see Sarah in her element as she mingled with the crowd, reading to the kids gathered around her, while I handled the donations and set up a photo booth for some adorable pet portraits. We had even arranged for a local animal trainer to give demonstrations. The allure of seeing cute animals working alongside humans drew in a larger crowd than we could have anticipated. I kept glancing at Sarah throughout, marveling at how far she'd come since that difficult conversation. Around mid-afternoon, as we watched people bidding on hours with the dog trainer, I noticed Sarah standing by herself a short distance away, a frown creasing her brow. I approached cautiously. "Hey, you good?" I asked, concerned. I had just seen her shine moments before. She looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of uncertainty and frustration. "I guess I never really thought about how much my choice affected others," she admitted quietly. "I mean, look at all these people. They're here to support a cause." Meanwhile, I felt like I'd let my cat down. Her voice trembled slightly, and I felt a surge of compassion wash over me. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and I understood that her past choices still haunted her despite her efforts to turn things around. The crowd buzzed in the background, but the world felt still between us. "Sarah," I said softly, "what you did wasn't ideal, but it was part of your journey, and now you're using that to make a difference." I took a moment to gather my thoughts before continuing. "Every person here has made mistakes in one way or another. Your honesty about what happened with your cat has inspired others to take responsibility. You're helping people understand that rehoming doesn't equal giving up. It can be a tough decision with a new beginning waiting on the other side." Her expression shifted slightly as she absorbed my words. "You really think so?" she asked, a hint of hope flickering in her eyes. I nodded, reassuring her with a smile. "I really do. And look around us. You're creating a community of awareness and compassion. That's bigger than just one bad decision." It was as if a dam inside her had broken, releasing the tension she'd held onto for so long, and she smiled, a genuine spark lighting up her features. As the day unfolded, I watched Sarah as she engaged with attendees, sharing stories, and embracing newfound friendships with those passionate about animal welfare. It filled me with warmth to witness her come alive in this atmosphere, where her past hadn't defined her, and her desire to advocate for animals took precedence. We did well that day beyond our expectations. We raised more funds than we could have hoped for and brought awareness to animal welfare like never before. As the sun began to set, and people started to gather their things, Sarah and I took a moment to reflect. "We really did it," she sighed, exhaustion lining her voice, but joy danced in her eyes. I felt a wave of pride swell within me as I nodded, the remnants of our earlier disagreement wholly eclipsed by this sense of achievement and camaraderie. It would take time for Sarah to completely forgive herself, and while we both knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, I was glad she had found purpose again. In the weeks following the event, we continued to volunteer at the shelter, slowly helping build a network of support and fostering hope in our community. I began to realize that even the most painful mistakes could pave the way for healing and understanding. They might be rough avenues, but they often lead us to where we are truly meant to be. With every adoption story we shared, every happy ending we witnessed, I felt grateful to be by Sarah's side, an unexpected partner in this journey towards redemption. Eventually, one evening after a long shift at the shelter, Sarah and I found ourselves just sitting in the quiet, the hum of the night wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. "I think I'm finally at peace with what happened," she whispered, her voice calm and assured. "And it's because of you." I smiled softly, feeling that once tense chapter of our friendship close like a book meeting its last page, knowing well that every ending sparks the light of a new beginning. The lessons embedded within lay the foundation for exploring our own journeys with newfound empathy and strength. As the stars flickered overhead, I marveled at how far we had come together. Gone were the days of tense discussions and misunderstandings, replaced by an unspoken bond forged in shared experiences and common goals. The shelter had become more than just a workplace, it was our sanctuary, a place where laughter spilled over the cages of cats and dogs alike, mingling with the sweet smell of pet food and the warm glow of the overhead lights. Evenings spent sorting donations turned into brainstorming sessions for future campaigns, and I could see the spark of determination in Sarah's eyes, illuminating her path forward. "You know," I said after a gentle pause, "if we keep this up, I think we'll make quite an impact." She chuckled softly, her laugh a melody that drove away the night's chill. The chilly breeze that wafted through the open window felt lovely, a reminder of the world outside, but inside, it felt like we had created our own safe haven, dedicated to ensuring others would find solace just as we had. One day, while wolfing down pizza in the break room, we started discussing the idea of an awareness poster for the fundraiser, describing responsible pet adoption in vivid detail. She suggested we feature personal stories from people who adopted pets from the shelter. I thought it was brilliant and couldn't help but share my own experience, how I had adopted my cat, Luna, who had been found roaming the streets, frightened and alone. The pure joy on her face as she listened reminded me how storytelling could bridge gaps, fostering connection and understanding amongst us. Every new idea swirled in the air like the sweet aroma of the pepperoni pie resting between us. The potential felt palpable. It dawned on me, as laughter echoed off the walls, that these projects were transforming both Sarah and me, aiding us in our journeys of growth, hers from overcoming loss, and mine from learning to advocate fiercely for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the day of the fundraiser approached, an air of excitement hung around us, and so did the nervous anticipation. We prepared for an influx of community members at the shelter, hoping to raise funds and awareness. With the event looming closer, however, the reality of putting ourselves out there made my stomach flutter. What if I stumbled over my words? What if no one showed up? Every worry was a small cloud in the bright sky of possibility, and Sarah seemed to sense my anxiety, offering reassuring smiles and gentle pats on the back as we honed our message. "We're just sharing our love for animals," she'd remind me, her strength palpable as she navigated her own hesitations. Her calm radiance became my anchor, and slowly, I realized that our paths intertwined not just in friendship but in the mission we shared. On the day of the fundraiser, the shelter vibrated with life and energy, various booths filled with animals looking for homes, volunteers bustling, and the intimate chatter of community filled the air. As people poured into the building, I felt a swell of pride. We had worked hard for this moment, igniting conversations about responsible pet care and the responsibilities that came with adopting. I was surprised when Sarah took her place behind the mic, addressing the crowd with vulnerability and strength. She spoke of the harsh realities within the world of animal welfare, but her voice trembled with passion and love, speaking about how significant it was to choose patience over impulse when it came to rehoming pets. It struck me then, witnessing the audience captivated by her story, that our paths were not merely parallel but actually woven together in a tapestry of understanding, compassion, and collective effort. Later that evening, as the last of the guests trickled out and the leftover pizza grew cold on the table, we took a moment to revel in our success, counting the donations and smiling at the progress we made. "I used to feel so lost, you know?" Sarah admitted, her brows furrowed slightly. "But talking about my experience, sharing it with others, it's like a weight lifted." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that this journey had not only been about healing for her but also a restorative experience for me too. Having pushed my insecurities aside to advocate for animals had carved out a stronger version of myself, one unafraid to speak up for what mattered. Eventually, as we started to clean up, I could feel the warmth of possibilities ahead. Perhaps it was more than just a fundraiser, it had become a heartfelt rallying call for the community on behalf of those animals still waiting for their forever homes. Months later, Sarah and I would still reminisce about that day, but more importantly, we continued to press on, reaching toward other endeavors that would help better our connection to animals in need. As we expanded our projects, I often thought of that original conflict, a simple miscommunication that had evolved into something profoundly transformative. A reminder that with understanding and time, even the deepest wounds could become a wellspring of strength and new beginnings, each day unfolding a little more like a gentle unfurling of a leaf in spring. It wasn't until a chilly autumn day months later when Sarah called with a breathless excitement. "You need to come over. There's someone here who needs a friend." Curious and slightly amused, I hurried over, only to find her nursing another stray she had taken in, a timid kitten with soulful eyes peering up at me. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and laughter, I knew that although there would always be challenges ahead, Sarah and I had learned how to navigate our way through life's twists and turns, one heartfelt story at a time. And perhaps, from one rehomed cat to another, we had both discovered that every end could lead to a new beginning, forging deeper connections in the heart of it all.